The killer was heartless. This was at the top of the list as far as brutality for us.
A well-loved woman is viciously murdered.
If she did not like what you were doing, she made no bones about telling you. But if she liked you, she would absolutely do anything for you.
A crime that puts a small town under the microscope.
You had two people with pretty strong personalities that clashed in the main street.
People thought that they were having an affair because he was more or less her go-to man.
He needed money for drugs and alcohol. He felt like she was going to have money in her house.
He has an antisocial past, and so she became the object of his anger and rage.
The truth will be revealed.
It was 1 in 28 quadrillion possibility it was a DNA match.
Go back to where you began. More times than not, the killer's name is already in the file.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Colon, Nebraska, the definition of a one-horse town.
Colon is a real small farming community made up mostly of just the bank, the post office, and one bar.
There's probably right around 100 people that live in the actual village of Colon itself. Many of the people that live there have lived there all their lives or grown up in the area.
Everyone knows everyone. Everyone kind of looks out for one another. All in all, it's a pretty tight-knit community.
There's very little crime that goes on in Colon in the years that I've worked at the Sheriff's Department. Typically, the type of incidents that we respond to are things like domestic disturbances or possibly a vandalism or maybe an occasional theft.
But on a warm summer evening, a call to the sheriff's office changes the town of Colon forever.
The first notification we got was at 6:30 p.m. on June 30th, 2003.
Our dispatch center received a call indicating that a suicide had happened in the village of Colon, and we responded from approximately 10 miles away. The location of the reported suicide is a one-car, single, detached garage on the south side of Main Street. Inside the garage, we can see a silver Ford Taurus, and on the left side, we see a large amount of blood on the ground. There was a small caliber handgun that was laying on the ground near the victim, but we started to notice a lot of very extensive head trauma that did not appear to be from a gunshot. And she had some bruising in areas on her legs and some marks on her arms that did not appear to be normal from what you would find in a suicide.
There was a semi-automatic Beretta handgun, but we didn't notice any shell casings lying about, which indicated it hadn't been fired, and there was not even a magazine in the gun. Either somebody had scared the victim with that gun, or she was trying to scare somebody with it. She appeared to have some defensive wounds. Her arms were beat up, her legs were beat up, and it did appear that she had been in a fight with somebody.
We saw the shoe prints in blood around the vehicle and smudge on the car. As you're looking around further, there's some blood spatter up on the side of the garage a little bit from where someone had forcibly come in contact with the blood and put it up onto the wall. And so you're coming up with a struggle, something violent that had occurred.
Police determine they're looking at Colon's first murder in decades.
In my lifetime here in law enforcement, there's probably been 3 homicides total in Saunders County.
The victim is 66-year-old Sharon Erickson, a lovable busybody and a Colon town fixture.
Sharon Erickson spent her entire 66 years in the community of Colon. There's probably no one in the Colon area that she didn't know or she wasn't familiar with. She worked at the courthouse for a number of years. She was very positive and outgoing and would offer up her opinion about different situations in the town. So that kind of personality doesn't always win everybody's friendship.
One person referred to her as Gladys Kravitz, was the neighbor on the old show Bewitched that was always always looking out the window to see what other people were doing. If she did not like what you were doing, then she made no bones about telling you. But if she liked you, she would absolutely do anything for you.
Heading up the investigation into the murder of Sharon Erickson are investigators Jay Peterson and Jeremy McCoy.
We're trying to look for some clues that maybe would point to what actually happened. How did Sharon die, and what the circumstances surrounding that?
It appeared that Miss Erickson had died from asphyxiation. It was a pretty forceful choke. Whoever had done this to her had really cranked on her throat. The victim's body was starting to move into the stages of rigor mortis, and so she had been there for a while.
Sharon was killed sometime between late in the evening on Sunday the 29th and early morning on Monday the 30th.
To track down Sharon's killer, investigators will need to unravel the final 24 hours of her life.
Her clothes seemed to be kind of disheveled, where her shirt was pulled up a little bit.
Her underwear was exposed, so we thought, well, it's possible that Miss Erickson could have been sexually assaulted. However, she was also in a pretty good fight, so it was loose-fitting clothing that could have just come down through that sort of a struggle. So at that point, we weren't sure that she had been sexually assaulted, but we would let the pathologist collect the sex assault kit at autopsy.
We locate her purse, and in the purse we find a movie ticket to indicate that she'd been to a movie early in the afternoon on Sunday. We also find her cell phone in the car. Sharon didn't carry her cell phone with her everywhere. Her cell phone was for emergencies when she was driving, and so it was just left in the vehicle, and she rarely used that cell phone.
Looking to build a narrative of the murder, officers turn their attention to Sharon's home.
Sharon actually lived across the street from the garage, which was a little bit odd that her garage was on one side of Main Street and her residence was on the other side.
Her ex-husband, Robert Erickson, gave her the property across the street that she built her garage on. And he had also given her that home that she lived in.
There's a delivery slip from a food delivery service that's posted on the front door, and it says something to the effect that they're sorry that they missed Sharon, and it was dated at 1 o'clock on the day that she was found.
The door was still open, and there was a newspaper that was just inside the door. As we moved our way through the house, we didn't notice anything that we considered to be out of the ordinary until we got to the kitchen area, where it appeared that the door had been pried open, and it appeared that the interior wood door had actually been kicked in. And then we also found a coal chisel that could have been used to pry open the back door.
We found a motion alarm that had been hanging on the door, and once this person tried to force their way through the door, I think that set the alarm off.
And then we noticed that her phone lines had been cut.
Working the theory that the murder could have been a robbery gone wrong, investigators continue their search of the house.
You can see that Sharon's bed was unmade, so it looked like she had been sleeping at some point.
There was a gun holster on the nightstand, which was consistent with the gun that we found in Miss Erickson's garage.
The victim was startled and was in her bed sleeping at the time.
But I saw no signs of struggle, and the killer had some sort of a confrontation, and she was still able to get to the garage before it came to a head.
Clearly, robbery seemed to be a motive in the beginning, but, there was nothing of substance that was taken, so obviously homicide preempted any further robbery.
Are there multiple motives here? Did he break into the house with the intention to steal, and then this evolved into a sexual assault? And I personally think that this could be less likely. Why would you break into a house at night when you know that the resident is likely to be there? Plus, if he's making arrangements such as cutting phone lines, it makes me think that he may have gone there to possibly commit a sexual assault against Sharon.
Investigators turn to the locals gathered at the crime scene, hoping they can help piece together Sharon's timeline leading up to her murder.
Rick Hartman is the postmaster in Colon. He was also on the volunteer fire department. He had a close relationship with Sharon, was one of the first people there when she was located in her garage.
He was upset, confused. He was having trouble processing what was going on.
Rick tells me that Miss Erickson is a creature of habit. She did the same things pretty much every day. 8:30 a.m., Miss Erickson goes to the post office to see the postmaster, and then down to the bank to see the women that worked at the bank.
She spoke with her cousin, who lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, every day at 5 o'clock on the telephone.
Miss Erickson and her cousin got together almost every Sunday.
According to Sharon's family and friends, Sunday, June 29th, was just as structured as any other day in her life.
Miss Erickson and her cousin had lunch in Lincoln at around 11:15 that morning, and then after that lunch, they had gone to a movie.
Sharon started to drive back to Colon at 4:30 that afternoon. Probably got back to Colon about 5:30, and no one saw Sharon after that.
June 30th at about 8:30, Sharon would have normally gone to the post office and picked up her mail, and that didn't occur.
She occasionally buys food from a Schwann's delivery driver, and he had stopped by her house about 1 o'clock. He thought she was around because her door was ajar, but he didn't find her, so he left her a note on her door.
When Sharon's cousin called at 5 o'clock and didn't receive an answer, she asked some of the ladies at the bank if they would go down and check on Sharon. They informed Rick Hartman, and he volunteered to come along to see if they could find anything.
Not finding Sharon in the house, the locals move on to the garage.
They could see that there was somebody laying on the floor of the garage, and then Rick Hartman yelled to the ladies from the bank to call.
Investigators wrap up their interviews. They notice that Postmaster Rick is behaving in an increasingly odd manner.
I mean, he was of some assistance, but then at the conclusion of that, he turned to the deputy and said, "Well, if you're not going to arrest me, I'm going to go home now." That wasn't something that we would normally hear from somebody who was just trying to help out.
The fact that Rick challenges the police, if you're going to arrest me, go ahead and arrest me. Naturally, he's going to make himself a person of interest. In most circumstances, if someone was truly innocent and had nothing to hide, no involvement in this crime, they would be cooperative and forthcoming to clear themselves. So this cavalier, offhand attitude is naturally going to raise eyebrows.
Some of the things that he said and did made him a person of interest fairly quickly.
Detectives investigating Colon, Nebraska's first murder in decades, the brutal slaying of 66-year-old Sharon Erickson. They already have the first person of interest, the town postmaster and Sharon's friend, Rick Hartman.
Rick was very cooperative with investigators. He was so close to Sharon and offering up so much information that it caused us to want to look further into maybe he had some role in her homicide.
Investigators dig into just how close Sharon and Rick were.
Rick Hartman would have contact with Sharon Erickson virtually every day, sometimes multiple times a day. He was able to disclose that he had a key to her place, was able to come and go, that she would solicit him to do odd jobs. So he was very forthcoming that they had a good relationship, but didn't include any kind of a romantic relationship at all.
He would take care of her property for her if Sharon traveled out of state, make sure the heat was on, make sure there was no water leaking anywhere and stuff like that. His sons even mowed her grass for her, so they were really pretty good friends.
As detectives question Rick, his behavior becomes increasingly suspicious.
Rick continued to ask the investigators what they thought, what they were looking for evidence. So his curiosity caused probably more focus on him than it would have normally if he hadn't been asking all of those pointed questions about details of the crime.
When Rick was told he was a suspect, he was indignant. He couldn't believe that he would be considered a suspect. He was angry that he was being considered as a suspect.
One way to explain Rick's behavior is that this could be a reaction to trauma. To me, it speaks to feelings of guilt, that they couldn't protect somebody that they care about. They may also want to get close to the investigation to be able to get details so that they can redirect or slant an investigation away from them as opposed to having people following up with them. So there could be multiple motivations at play there.
Investigators press Rick for his timeline on the night of Sharon's murder.
He says he was at home that Sunday evening with his wife watching TV. His page out to a fire. And then his wife actually accompanied him in their car to the scene of the fire. And then he and his wife arrived back home about 11:30 p.m. on Sunday night. And then they remained at home the rest of the night until he left for work roughly at 7:20 a.m. on Monday morning, June 30th.
Rick Hartman's wife confirmed his alibi time frame of when he he was there and when he left.
We had nothing to refute that wasn't true. Minus his wife not telling us the truth or minus him slipping out of the house, we don't believe that he would have had anything to do with this crime.
If an officer takes one lead and just follows that lead to the exclusion of others, what it may do is take away from the probability of finding the right person. So every lead has to be followed. Every piece of evidence has to be looked into, especially in a homicide, because not everything is as it seems.
Looking for new leads, police canvassed Sharon's neighbors.
We spent days walking around the town of Colon trying to find people at home during the time frame that this murder would have occurred. Their whereabouts, any suspicions, we were trying to cover every base.
We were hoping that we would find some clue from somebody who saw something or heard something that would give us a description of a vehicle, a different timeline, that sort of thing.
One of the people that we wanted to contact, their last name is Mars. So if you look out the Mars family's front door, you're looking directly into the back of Miss Erickson's house.
Investigators speak with the Mars family, asking if they had seen or heard anything unusual on the night of June 29th, or in the early hours of June 30th.
Donna and her husband and her two sons had returned from Kansas, and they were helping their aunt put a roof on her house. One of the sons, the youngest, had gone to bed, and the other, James, had left. Donna told me that she was home that evening and had fallen asleep in the living room, and that she was there until James had returned home about 1:30 that night. And then after he returned home, she had gone to bed.
The fact that James Mars came home around 1:30 a.m. and lived almost a stone's throw away from Sharon's home certainly gave him an opportunity to have witnessed something or have participated in a homicide. He was certainly a person that we felt we need to cross off our list. James Mars was kind of a low-functioning individual. He did odd jobs, worked for a local farmer, but he didn't have any real consistent employment where he was required to be somewhere at a certain time and got off at a certain time.
He was described as to be a heavy drinker. He drank a lot, so he had some alcohol violations, perhaps of driving under the influence of alcohol, but nothing more violent than that. He seemed to be fairly reserved, fairly quiet. He just didn't seem to be as the kind of person that really wanted to talk much about anything. I had asked him about what he was doing the weekend of June 29th and 30th. And he said he and his brother had come back from Kansas, and they actually got back into town around 10:30 that Sunday night.
James left Colon around 11:30 p.m., went into Wahoo to a friend's house to drink some beer. Was at his friend's house for approximately an hour, left around 12:30, and went to a bar in downtown Wahoo.
After spending a little bit of time there, he said he moved over to another bar. However, when he got to that bar, it was roughly 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was last call. So it was at that point, he said that he drove home. And he said once he got home, about 1:30, which was consistent with what his mom said when he walked in, he said he drank a pop and watched TV for a little bit, and then he said he went off to bed. The next thing he remembers is his dad had to wake him up at 9 a.m.
There were no immediate red flags, and the alibi was fairly solid where he was in Wahoo, who he talked with, that he went to the bar. We were able to confirm all of that.
There was nothing which really tied James to Sharon. There was not a relationship between them. There was not a feud between them. There was not a lot of interaction between them. And so there wasn't anything specific tying him to the case.
We were having trouble really getting a motive for why he would have killed Sharon. So him lacking a motive, his level of cooperation, caused us to focus more on other people than we were on James.
With James Mars ruled out, police turned to the evidence from the crime scene, looking for clues that could lead them to Sharon's killer.
The gun, after it was sent to the lab, came back. No fingerprints were retrieved. No DNA was found on the gun. And so that was basically dead end. You're really struggling to figure out what happened, how it happened, who did it, and get some justice for the victim. So it's frustrating.
And it's not easy to cope with sometimes. I'm at my wit's end right here. I don't know where to go. The community was on a heightened state of alert because this sort of thing doesn't happen in a small town like Colon.
People are afraid. People know that most people are murdered by somebody that they know. So then the question becomes is who in this small town is a killer?
In the investigation into Sharon Erickson's murder, detectives have hit a dead end until the autopsy results breathe new life into the case.
The cause of death was a manual strangulation. Her hyoid bone had been broken, which takes a lot of force and pressure to the throat to break that bone. And so that's just another...
So determined that Miss Erickson had been sexually assaulted and the killer was heartless. This was at the top of the list as far as brutality for us.
The amount of violence led us to think that it was someone who may have been close to her or someone who was very, very angry. And it was a very personal attack on Sharon.
As investigators hunt for suspects with emotional connections to Sharon, a new witness throws the whole timeline of the murder into question.
There was a young girl that delivered newspapers in the Colon area, and she had gone to Sharon's house to deliver the newspaper on June 30th.
She had told her mother that when she had delivered the newspaper, she had seen a man chasing Miss Erickson out of her house and chased her over to her garage, and then that she had heard a couple of bangs. She initially couldn't describe Miss Erickson's killer very well, but she did say he was wearing dark blue jeans and a dark shirt. When the little girl dropped the paper off and when the women from the bank actually found the body, we're talking about an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half. And when we arrived on the scene of the crime, the blood was pretty dry, and it certainly was a crime scene that was older than 2 hours. Also, when the little girl mentioned 2 bangs, I just didn't believe it was likely this is what transpired.
After further investigation, we were able to determine that she developed that memory, if you will, from listening to family members or people in the community talking about it.
Small-town rumor mill in cases of homicide compose a number of problems, but also opportunities. There'll be a lot of scuttlebutt, as we say. At the same time, when people know something, they don't necessarily call up the police. They may talk to their neighbor who talks to somebody else, and leads can often materialize sort of through this grassroots storytelling method.
As police eliminate this one tip, more come in.
Many people told us that we needed to talk to the truck drivers that would park their trucks on the street in front of her house and leave them idle, which irritated her because they're loud. One truck driver, Chuck, had his shop right next to Miss Erickson's house. He told her he was going to plant grass in there. Well, what he had done was he tore it down and they hauled rock in there so they could park trucks on it. And that made her mad too, because apparently she was worried that her property was going to be damaged when they tore the building down.
She wasn't scared or afraid of confrontation, and she would definitely let someone know if she didn't enjoy something that they were doing.
He wasn't overly respectful of her, and she was pretty demanding. You had 2 people with pretty strong personalities that kind of clashed in the main street of Colon.
There was an instance where it's his house. So she tossed it over in front of Chuck's shop, and it shattered on the sidewalk, and he was in the shop. And so that made him mad, and he walked over to her house, he pounded on the front door and told her to get out there, come out here.
Could Sharon's neighbor, Chuck, have built up so much rage towards Sharon that he finally snapped?
One thing that Chuck had said when I interviewed him was he made reference to her about being a busybody, always having to know everything that's going on. And then he said, she's a nut, but she's our nut. And that's how he felt about her.
Not buying Chuck's story, investigators home in on where he was at the time of the murder.
Chuck had told us that he had been out of town driving. He was in the Ohio area, that he had picked a load up on June 26th that had it delivered, and actually didn't get back to Nebraska until July 1st.
Chuck had receipts on the 29th and 30th. I think it was meal and fuel, so he clearly had receipts that proved he was several states away and didn't return to Colon until July 1. So he was eliminated immediately with his truck receipts.
The truck drivers had a very solid alibi, mostly due to their profession that they are required to keep certain records, and they had all of those to provide to us, and it was proven that they were all out on the road.
With investigators not making any inroads, fear tightens its grip on Colon.
People were very bothered by a crime like this occurring in their small town. They were bothered by the fact that this person had not been arrested yet, and they felt like this could happen to one of them as well.
You had people looking around over their shoulder about, oh, I think it's this person, oh, I think it's that person.
So I think that the community was on a heightened state of alert.
When something like this happens in a small community, I think that there is a large spillover effect. People may be questioning each other as to who might be responsible. It could also pressure the investigators as well to find a killer and explain the theory of the crime, which can be stressful in addition to the fear that the crime itself is causing.
Having eliminated every person of interest in the case, investigators hope forensic testing on Sharon's rape kit will provide a DNA profile of her killer.
This is a case that really epitomizes the importance of offender DNA. When you have no suspects and nothing really to go on, this is why advances in the forensic science have been so crucial.
With the sex assault kit that went to our State Patrol crime lab, they were able to determine that there was a DNA profile there. However, weren't able to extract that DNA, so their technology wasn't able to come up with the DNA profile.
But detectives have one more shot at developing a profile.
Our university med center, to the UNM med center, hoping that they could get a profile.
They were able to come up with a DNA profile, but the DNA doesn't just tell you who it is. The job's not over. Now you have to come up with the suspect.
Just as police learn a DNA profile has been established for Sharon Erickson's killer, a previous suspect comes back on their radar.
People thought that Miss Erickson and Rick Hartman were having some sort of an affair because Rick Hartman was more or less her go-to man. But there was another rumor that somebody had seen Rick Hartman and Miss Erickson talking out in front of her house on the street at 4 a.m. on the morning of June 30th, during the time frame of the crime.
Rick's behavior only contributes to the suspicion swirling around him.
Rick Hartman just kept talking to the media and other people about this, and so it would just shed more suspicion on him. Because why would you want to keep opening this up and opening yourself up to people running you down and wanting to ask you questions about this?
They may actually want the attention. They may want to go out, tell their story, and get that gratification from pulling one over on the investigators if they are in fact the killer. And the media can be very useful in terms of capturing those reactions.
The family of Sharon Erickson decided that they were going to have an estate sale where they were going to sell off a lot of her items. And at that estate sale, Mr. Hartman bought her bed and mattress. That caused a lot of conversation in the community.
We were also contacted after that by a mother whose daughter indicated that she saw Rick Hartman at the sale. The daughter became scared and cowered behind her mother, and also, since that point, had not wanted to go into the post office. For some reason, she was scared of Mr. Hartman. She was the same girl who had also had the story after the murder about seeing Sharon being chased across the street.
If Rick Hartman and Miss Erickson were having a relationship that was more personal than platonic, if one of them wanted to get out of the relationship and the other one didn't, it could always lead to some sort of violence.
With the incriminating evidence against Rick building, investigators haul him back down to the station for another round of questioning.
He denied that he had purchased those items at that estate sale, and that really raised red flags. If he bought those items, why did he buy them? And then if he did, why would he deny that he bought them? So there were just a number of things that he did that continued to cause us to focus in his direction.
Investigators confront Rick about the rumors that he was having an affair with Sharon, but he dismisses them as idle gossip.
We don't want to see somebody get wrongly accused of a crime. We don't want to see the wrong people arrested for a
Polygraph tests is to eliminate suspects. And so, during one of Rick's interviews, he volunteered to take a polygraph test in order for us to eliminate him as a possible suspect. So the results of the polygraph test came back inconclusive, and so at that point, we can't eliminate him as a suspect based on the polygraph.
But with the DNA profile of the killer now established, detectives know they could be one match away from solving the case.
And so we asked Rick to give DNA samples for the investigation, and samples were collected from Mr. Hartman.
But we did not get a DNA profile match with Rick Hartman.
So he was completely eliminated at that time.
Looking back, I just think that, everyone deals with death differently. He was probably anxious, and that was his reaction.
With yet another suspect eliminated, police are back to square one in the investigation into Sharon Erickson's brutal murder.
We began taking DNA samples from those people that we felt probably were close to the top of our list and submitting them for examination.
As they await the DNA results, investigators circle back to the previous suspect, James Mars.
James Mars had also made statements to other people about if the cops asked you where I was on this particular night, tell them I was with you, which was not consistent with what he told us. So when those kinds of things started to surface, that pointed it more to James Mars.
The question then is, could the son of the neighbors, the Mars family, could he be good for this, considering he was actually spoken to back on the first day? I always like to say, when you're stuck, when a case seems to be bogged down or going cold, go back to where you began. More times than not, the killer's name is already in the file.
After a series of dead ends and false starts in the murder investigation of 66-year-old Sharon Erickson, her neighbor, James Mars, has come back on police radar.
When we had interviewed James' girlfriend, she had told me that they'd been girlfriend-boyfriend for about 2.5 years, and they had a child together, but they weren't living together. When James left the bars in Wahoo and had gotten home the night of the crime, he called his girlfriend about 1:30 that night. He started confronting her about possibly seeing other men, and I think that the two of them had gotten into an argument on the telephone. So the call lasted about 10 minutes that night, and then the girlfriend ended up hanging up on James. He was angry. Part of me thought that he wanted to go meet his girlfriend, but she maybe wasn't interested, and he was stewing a little bit, and then he left the house again. He was out of money. He wasn't a wealthy person, and perhaps he thought Miss Erickson might be an opportunity for him to get some, and he went over her fence.
The suspects come in. They confirm the investigators' new theory.
The DNA matched to James Mars. It was 1 in 28 quadrillion possibility it was someone else. And so there was a lot of relief.
That's the nail in the coffin. We know we had the right guy, and we've got scientific evidence that's going to support it. We were, frankly, over the top happy with where we were going.
Having tied James Mars to Sharon Erickson's murder, police move in to arrest him.
We decided to arrest him early in the morning before he went to work and to try to catch him off guard, which we did.
While in custody, investigators question James about Sharon's murder, but he isn't talking.
He acted surprised. He couldn't believe that he was being arrested for this. He claimed that he had nothing to do with it.
You've got the wrong guy. This is BS. I'm not going anywhere. I want a lawyer. And then he was taken down to the Nebraska Department of Corrections. There was some other inmates there that James had actually confessed to, that he had actually committed this homicide.
With James's jailhouse confession, investigators are able to piece together Sharon Erickson's final 24 hours.
On the night of June 29, 2003, at 11:30, James Mars left Colon, went to Wahoo to a friend's house where they drank some beer, and then eventually went to a bar after that. And then at 1:05, James Mars went to the Oasis bar in Wahoo, tried to get a drink. It was after hours, so they did not serve him. He left shortly thereafter.
And he arrived back at his house roughly at 1:20 a.m. on Monday morning, June 30th. James calls his girlfriend about 1:30 a.m. James and his girlfriend have the fight, and they have about a 10-minute conversation. James is pretty mad. He's been drinking, and at that point, he obtains a cold chisel. James leaves the house, and he goes over to Miss Erickson's house.
So he jumps the fence in her backyard. He cuts the phone lines first, and then pries open the back door.
Sharon is waking up, and Sharon has been able to get dressed, or at least get her shoes on. At that time, she confronts James Mars about breaking into her house. I think Sharon may have picked up the telephone to call the police and found it was dead, and so her only option was to drive somewhere. She had to get to her car.
Sharon runs to the garage, where James catches up with her.
James confronted her and realized at some point that that gun wasn't loaded. sexually assaulted her in that garage.
She fought back and was trying to defend herself, but she was just overcome. We concluded that she was killed before 3 o'clock in the morning.
The one piece that still doesn't make sense to investigators is James's motive for the murder.
He'd been drinking, consumed some cocaine, and he'd been in a fight with his girlfriend. He was angry. That probably all came to a head, especially after he had a gun pointed at his head and was probably yelled at by Sharon as well. And so that probably just made him more angry.
He needed money for drugs and alcohol, so he felt like Sharon was going to have money in her house, and then he assaulted her physically and sexually. But why was it necessary to kill her?
James Mars went there deliberately to commit a sexual assault against Sharon because an older woman is an easy target, someone who's a vulnerable victim. And the amount of violence reflects his background. This fight with his girlfriend, he has an antisocial past, and so I think then she became the object of this anger and rage to satisfy a sexual desire.
The end result was good, that James is in prison, but I can't help but think sometimes if we couldn't have had him there quicker, have we approached some of the things differently. So I carry that with me all the time.
The town of Colon has saved the pain of a trial when James pleads guilty to second-degree murder.
It was a big relief for Sharon's family to get that closure and be able to hold someone accountable for his actions. It's not going to bring Sharon back, but it's the most we can do for Sharon.
Well, the timeline really helps us in excluding possible suspects and then narrowing down who we want to really focus on. And then the DNA, that's the nail in the coffin.
On what would have been Sharon Erickson's 67th birthday, James Mars is sentenced to life with no possibility of parole.
I think it's unfortunate that somebody took her life so soon. Sharon was a retired person that had worked hard all her life and had chosen to live in a small community because of how safe it was. And essentially, all she wanted to do was just live there quietly and simply.
Probably the saddest thing about this is the fact that Sharon grew up in that community. She contributed to the county with her hard work, wanting to make Colon a good place to live. And the fact that, that was cut short is a tremendous tragedy.
We think that this is a robbery, but there's also what appears to be rage. He's shot 9 times. This seems more personal.
A respected and generous entrepreneur, brutally gunned down.
He was well revered within the Hispanic community. He was someone that people looked up to.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
She's sending the victim a text message after she knows that he's dead.
We see a vehicle that matches the description from our tipster. We're onto something here.
He was upset with Raphael because he found out that he was hitting on his wife.
Jealousy as a motive for murder drives people into a blind rage that can only be satisfied through murder.
The truth will be revealed.
This is the only number that we didn't have identified.
This is the person that called Raphael to pull him to another place, which ended up being the place that he was murdered.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Tulsa, Oklahoma, once dubbed the oil capital of the world, now a bustling and vibrant multicultural city in America's South.
Tulsa is not a really large metropolis like some of the major cities in America, but it is a pretty large city, especially for Oklahoma. As far as demographics of Tulsa, the Hispanic population is about 15%.
The area around 21st and Garnett, the Santa Cecilia Plaza, is a pretty big hub for the Hispanic community.
It is the heart of the community because everything that they need and want is in that area.
At first light, warm spring morning, A 911 call is made to the Rogers County Sheriff's Office.
On the morning of May 1st, 2015, a dump truck driver was actually driving across the river bridge and looked down and noticed a silver car. That truck driver called Rogers County 911. A deputy arrived on scene, and the trooper began operations to recover the vehicle from the river. As the vehicle was being pulled up the embankment, the trunk pops open, and when it gets to the top, the deputy is able to see that there is a body in the trunk.
Homicide detectives Gavin Cottrell and Kyle Baker of Rogers County Sheriff's Office are called to the scene.
When I received the call, I was driving into work that morning, and I proceeded to the location of where the body was found.
Where I can see that there is a Hispanic male, approximately mid-40s, that is in the back of the trunk.
The body appeared to have multiple gunshots to his torso. It appeared that the victim was robbed and then murdered, or vice versa. And we know that because his pockets were turned inside out. Somebody rifled through his pockets. A normal person wouldn't leave their pocket turned inside out.
As investigators survey the crime scene, a narrative of the crime starts to come into focus.
As we do some further investigation, we can see on the ground that there are multiple tire tracks. So we know that not only did we have multiple people there, but we also had another vehicle. There were 9mm shell casings located there. There were other calibers that we identified, but the bullet entry points to the body appeared to be consistent with a .380 or a 9mm. We also find several beer cans in the immediate vicinity of where we found the tire tracks. We also discovered some blood on the ground, which led us to be fairly certain that he was actually killed at that scene. So that gave us a little bit more confidence that we're going to get some sort of physical evidence from our killers.
My initial thoughts of this crime was a true whodunit. We don't have any leads at this time. We don't have any witnesses that say they saw somebody kill this person or saw somebody push this vehicle off into the river.
For the investigation to move forward, detectives will first need to identify the victim.
The vehicle has the name of El Coro Caminos, which translates to Roadrunner, and we quickly figured out that he is a taxi cab driver. During the search of the vehicle, we located a couple different cell phones in the cab. One of them was the victim's cell phone.
As we're conducting our investigation on the scene, someone pulls up and they're pretty hysterical. They're, crying, they're upset. We discovered that that individual's name was Oscar, and he was actually the victim's brother.
While I was speaking to Oscar, he told me that his brother's name is Rafael, and that he was a local taxi cab driver.
The victim is 38-year-old Rafael Hernandez, originally from Guanajuato, Mexico, who has been living in Tulsa for 20 years.
Oscar gives us a lot of information about Rafael. Rafael pretty much specifically gave Hispanic individuals rights to court, any appointments that they needed. Rafael spoke Spanish and English, so he could provide both translation services and right there. According to Oscar, he was well revered within the Hispanic community. He was someone that people looked up to and people really required, to get through their daily lives. Someone that would drop whatever he's doing to try to help somebody.
To find out who killed Rafael Hernandez, investigators will need to piece together his final 24 hours.
No, anybody that wanted to harm him.
He told us that Rafael was a business owner and dealt a lot in cash. That quite frequently, Rafael would carry around $2,000 on his person daily, and that was no secret to anyone, in the community.
Driving a taxi or operating a rideshare service, these are inherently dangerous occupations. You're letting strangers into your vehicle, and you're in a position of great vulnerability. The difference with a traditional taxi cab is, of course, fares being paid by cash, which then also makes you a susceptible target for robbery.
As we're looking at this, we think that, this is a robbery, but there's also what appears to be rage and overkill in killing him. He's shot 9 times. This is something that seems more personal, like the victim knows the killer. Oscar tells us that he had talked to his brother on the phone at approximately 11:30 on April 30th. Rafael tells Oscar that he's picking up a client, an individual by the name of Ernesto, at 9 o'clock p.m. and is going to be driving him to Houston. He he doesn't expect that he'll be back until May 1st at approximately 10:30.
Investigators now have their first person of interest in the brutal murder of Rafael Hernandez, Ernesto Loras.
The crime occurred in Rogers County, but the people we were investigating and needed to speak with lived in Tulsa County. We collaborated with them, digging up information on the people that we knew or looking into. We tracked down Ernesto Loras, and I interviewed him. He was very cooperative. He seemed to be open to what our questioning was, that he didn't have anything to do with this, and that he was telling us the truth. Ernesto told me that he was supposed to meet with Rafael at 9 p.m. at the gas station, and they were going to make the trip to Texas. Ernesto then sends a text to Rafael at 9 p.m. when he arrives at the gas station.
So at 9:22 p.m., Rafael calls Ernesto and indicates to him that he is going to be late. He got a call from an individual that he knows and that he has to help him, that he was having some car trouble on the highway, and then that he would be back to get Ernesto and that they would leave.
Ernesto told me that he attempted to call Rafael multiple times at 10 p.m. and didn't get any answer. Ernesto then tells us he went ahead and drove to Texas himself. We began digging into Ernesto's phone records to see if he's telling us the truth. And reviewing those records, we did see that he did in fact drive to Texas, like he said.
Based on those call detail records, we can be fairly certain that Rafael was not killed by Ernesto.
But the information Ernesto provides allows detectives to start building a timeline for Rafael's murder.
At 9:22 p.m. on April 30th. And then at 10:24 p.m. on April 30th, Ernesto is no longer able to get a hold of Rafael. So we're able to presume at this point that Rafael's not answering his phone because he's already dead. So we use times of 9:22 to roughly 10:24 to establish that he was killed in that window of time.
We needed to figure out who this mystery person was who called Rafael, saying that they had a broken down vehicle and that they needed help translating.
This is the person that called Rafael to pull him to another place, which ended up being the place that he was murdered.
In the murder of well-loved local taxi driver, Rafael Hernandez, investigators are working the theory that they're dealing with a robbery gone wrong. Looking for leads, investigators reach out to the media.
We received information off our tip line that some passerbys had seen a black truck, a black SUV, and a silver car on the side of the road on the Caney River Bridge between 9:30 and 10 o'clock. So this was a good lead for us on what kind of vehicles were there.
So as we're thinking about possible theories on what had happened at the scene, we know that there's at least two people. There's two cars involved, and there's multiple sets of footprints.
With this new evidence that they're likely looking for two killers, detectives are hoping Rafael's brother, Oscar Hernandez, can shed more light on who might have wanted Rafael dead.
Oscar tells us that Rafael is kind of a ladies' man. He's not married, but he's got a girl that he's kind of trying to pursue romantically. The individual's name is Laura Contreras, and she is very friendly with Rafael, but she lives with a man who she has a child with. They're kind of common law married.
So this was very interesting to figure out that she was in a relationship with Rafael and with a different person.
It starts to build into this theory that there's a revenge motive to this death, that Rafael was possibly killed because of a relationship he was pursuing with a married woman.
Looking for answers, investigators bring Laura Contreras into the station for questioning.
During the interview, Laura was very guarded, trying to be as vague as possible with us. We knew that she was hiding something from us, we just didn't know what it was.
So while we're interviewing Laura, she tells us that she is friendly with Rafael, and they talk frequently, and that Rafael will come up and see her at her place of employment and bring her flowers and things like that.
Would you take these flowers home, or?
Yeah, that's it.
I guess that's not kind of understanding that exactly. I think any guy would be a little aggravated at that.
Yeah, but he knows me. I have a social life.
Laura told us that her...
Were you guys more than friends?
No.
There was no sexual relationship. For your information, that there was more than just friendship.
We realized that this did not match up for what Oscar had told us previously. Somebody wasn't telling us the truth.
Laura tells us that she had actually seen Rafael multiple times on April 30th. But the last time she says Raphael had actually came into her work at 11 p.m. on April 30th. That didn't match up with the information that we had. We had call detail records indicating that Raphael was already dead at that point. It just increased the suspicion we had for her from that entire interview. She indicates to us that she left a little after 11 p.m. and that she went straight home. Pablo and the daughter are already asleep. Laura tells us that at approximately 7 a.m. on May 1st that she saw on Facebook that Raphael had been murdered. Based on the fact that, she's given us times that aren't matching up with what we know to be true. We think that Laura could absolutely be involved. And because of that, we have to dig deeper into her to determine if she is or is not involved.
As detectives work to verify Laura's alibi, Raphael's cell phone records come in.
In order for cell phones to work, they have to make a connection, which is commonly called a handshake, with a tower. And as you're traveling down the highway, as you're moving, your cell phone constantly updates and pings to the closest tower.
We received Raphael's phone records, and we were able to corroborate Ernesto's story that at 9:22 when Raphael texted that he was actually traveling northbound on 169, headed towards the area where he was ultimately killed. We know Raphael's location by triangulating the signal of his cell phone as it's moving down the highway.
So as we're examining these call detail records, we find one number that kind of stands out to us. This number made the phone call to Raphael's phone approximately 9:15 p.m. before Raphael tells Ernesto that he is diverting to go help someone.
We found out that it was a burner phone. This number is very suspicious because people who don't want to be found or don't want us knowing who they are will use a burner phone to conceal their identity.
This is the only number that we didn't have identified as to who was behind that number. It was crucial for us to determine who was using that phone.
At 9:48 p.m., Raphael called this mystery number, and it was the last time Raphael had communicated with anybody.
We know that Ernesto tried to call Raphael at 10:24 p.m., and Raphael doesn't answer. But now we also know that Raphael has called this burner phone at 9:48. So the window gets narrower.
Having narrowed down Raphael's window of death to between 9:48 p.m. and 10:24 p.m., investigators dig into his cell phone records, looking for new leads.
While we're examining call detail records, we learn that Laura has actually called or communicated with Raphael's phone at 8:39 a.m. on May 1st, which struck us again as odd and very suspicious because Laura has indicated to us that she was aware of Raphael's death at 7 a.m. on May 1st.
We also knew Laura was lying unquestionably because she says she saw him at 11 p.m. on April 30th. We know that he was on the highway at 9:30.
Her lie's exposed because the phone records show that the phone was traveling at the time when she claims that she was meeting him. It certainly gives the investigators pause to consider why she's lying and who she's protecting.
We already began to think that Laura was a potential suspect because of her deceitfulness, but now we're wondering if she really was involved because she's sending the victim a text message after she knows that he's dead.
In the brutal shooting of local taxi driver and businessman Rafael Hernandez, detectives are zeroing in on his girlfriend, Laura Contreras.
During the course of the interview, Laura actually gives us the wrong address. So it was suspicious to us that she would provide us with an address that wasn't accurate.
Through multiple different sources, we were able to locate her residence.
We decided to go over and we want to put eyes on her. While we're there, we see a vehicle that matches the description of one of the vehicles that we got from our tipster. It was a black pickup truck.
We also noticed a black SUV, and that's when we made a conclusion that the truck and this SUV were more than likely the ones that the tipster saw at the scene of the crime.
We're onto something here, and we need to dig a lot deeper into Laura and the people that live at her house.
Then we observed Laura getting into her black SUV, and she leaves her residence. We contacted Tulsa police, and they made a traffic stop on her. She ended up having some warrants, and she was subsequently arrested on those.
allowed us to be able to get her into custody and really put some pressure on her, because at this point we really feel like she's involved.
Back at Laura's residence, Detectives Cottrell and Baker observed two males exit the house and approach the black pickup truck. They're identified as Pablo Lopez, Laura's common-law partner, and Roberto Rincon, a friend who is living with them and the owner of the truck.
The truck that we locate there, we end up kind of walking around looking at it. We see blood on the tag. It's a bloody fingerprint, and it shocks us.
We talked to Roberto about the vehicle he was driving and why there was blood on the paper tag. Roberto said he didn't know anything about the blood and that he had just purchased the vehicle on May 2nd. So while searching the truck, we did locate two cellular devices. Roberto told us that the one in the glove box was not his and that he had found it the day before and was going to hold on to it until the person who lost it was going to call.
He's got another phone that he's keeping around that potentially could be a burner phone.
We asked, are there any firearms inside the house? Pablo told us that he did own a firearm and that it was a .380 and it was inside the house.
The .380 pistol is extremely similar in size, as far as projectile goes, to a 9mm. That interests us because the holes that are in Raphael's body could very well have come from a .380.
It all started to add up. There's blood at the scene. We have a cell phone that no one wants to claim ownership of. But the vehicles match the same descriptions of the people who saw them at the homicide scene.
We're excited at this point. We think that we've solved the case.
Knowing that they are looking for two killers, and with the evidence stacking up against Roberto and Pablo, investigators haul them into the station for questioning.
The question gets brought up about the relationship between Laura and Raphael. Pablo's not really concerned with the idea of a relationship. He describes them as just being friends.
I do not believe that Pablo is not jealous. I believe that there has to be some jealousy with his lover talking to another man all the time.
Jealousy is among the top motives for murder, especially in cases where males perceive that they're in part of a romantic love triangle. They want to get back at the person that they're thinking is involved with their partner.
It drives people into a blind rage, if you will, and they ultimately become blinded by this impulse that can only be satisfied through murder.
Detectives dig into Pablo's timeline for the night of Raphael's murder.
The night of April 30th, Pablo was telling us he was helping get the kids to sleep. He wasn't sure where Roberto was and hadn't seen him.
Pablo tells investigators that when Laura got home, he was already asleep.
Then detectives shift from Pablo to Roberto to see if their stories match up.
Roberto tells me that he gets home around 5 p.m. on April 30th, and that he hung out with Pablo all night, they cooked dinner, and that Laura arrived home around 11. It is very interesting when Pablo and Roberto give us their accounts of what happened that night because none of it makes sense. We were really unsure what is going on or what the truth was.
She'll reveal what really happened the night of Raphael's murder.
We're talking to Laura and trying to put some more pressure on her to try to figure out why there are so many inconsistencies in her story. And as we're asking her, she indicates that the time that she saw Raphael was actually earlier, like closer to 8 p.m. than 11 p.m.
We're able to track down her employer, who confirmed that she was at work at 11 and that she was there during the time that Raphael was killed. At this point, we know now that her alibi has been confirmed and that she was not at the scene where Raphael was killed.
Despite Laura being ruled out as a suspect, investigators still believe that Pablo and Roberto were involved in Raphael's murder.
We began questioning Roberto more about the blood on the tag of his vehicle. He did confirm again that he didn't know anything about the blood and that he purchased the vehicle on May 2nd. We went to the dealership and found out that the vehicle was in fact inside the lot at the time of the murder on May 1st. So that vehicle was not involved in this case whatsoever.
And then we get information back on the burner phone that Roberto has. And we're expecting that we're going to see the number is our suspect number that communicated with Raphael. And it comes back that it's not the number. And that was just something that just deflated us.
Although the things that they're telling us may not be truthful, they are really not involved in Raphael's death.
With Pablo and Roberto eliminated as suspects in the murder of Rafael Hernandez, the investigation grinds to a halt.
true whodunit homicide. We have a lot of pressure on us to try to figure out what happened. At this point, we have no idea who could have murdered Raphael. We have to start at square one looking for who owns that mystery number that we can't identify.
It was the last number that Raphael had made contact with, and he's lured to his demise. So we believe that person is either our killer or a witness to the murder. We obtained the records for the burner phone, and as we tracked that phone, we noticed that it left Tulsa and eventually began pinging on a cell phone tower near the Caney River Bridge at approximately 9:30 p.m. on the night that Raphael was murdered.
This is very significant because it puts the burner phone and Raphael's phone in the same vicinity on the night of April 30th at 9:30 p.m. At 9:48, Raphael contacts the burner phone. At 10:17, the burner phone leaves the area and Raphael's phone does not leave. It stays at the same location. At 10:24 p.m., Ernesto calls Raphael, in which he does not answer. This is telling us there's a 29-minute period where Raphael was murdered. His phone never leaves the scene. We conducted cell phone search records on the burner phone and learned that the phone was purchased
fake name. No one existed by that name.
This is where it gets really crazy. So digging more into the cell phone records, we learned that this phone number had communicated with some other phone numbers, so we began calling and trying to identify those people that this burner phone was connected to.
Investigators zero in on a number that Amalfo Mora's burner phone called numerous times between April 25th and April 30th, the day Raphael was killed.
We come across a number that communicates very frequently with the burner phone. And that person is named Marco Martinez. We do some research into him. We find out he has a felony warrant, so we arrest Marco. While Marco is in custody, we interview him.
And Marco says, well, I don't know who that is. He has never seen that number before. But typing the phone number into his phone, it did pop up a name of Parakeet. Marco tells us that he does not know Parakeet's real name and that everyone goes by nicknames in that area. Even though Marco doesn't know Parakeet's real name,
this is government.
He was able to provide us a location of where Parakeet lives.
And he describes Parakeet car as being a black Nissan Cube, which is an SUV style of vehicle. So Parakeet, he's attached to the burner phone, and now he drives a vehicle that is very consistent with the type of vehicle that was seen in the area of the homicide.
Marco elaborated even more about how Parakeet did have some money problems. He had a lot of debt to people, and that he needed money to pay all these debts off. And Marco overheard a conversation with Parakeet talking to some friends that he was upset with Raphael because he found out that he was hitting on his wife.
I don't know if he touched his wife. I don't know if he... But remember what I was saying before, that Raphael liked to be with everybody's wife. Like, he came to me and he was like, because the first people you have to protect is your family. If someone does something to your family, you have to respond, no matter what.
At this point, we're putting together that there is a motive for jealousy and a motive for money. Because it was known to people that Raphael carried, around $2,000 in cash.
You have somebody who's reported to be very jealous of Raphael. At the same time, there could also be a financial motive. Raphael is a taxi driver and has cash. So I'm going to go after you if you've made a pass at my wife, and also get what I want in the process.
Thinking Parakeet could be their killer, investigators descend on his apartment in hopes of tracking him down.
We basically staked the apartment complex out, and it wasn't very long at all. We're sitting in the parking lot, and this little guy comes out from the apartment, exactly like Marco described, and he comes out to that this belongs to Roman Medrano.
With the mounting evidence against Roman, detectives secure a search warrant for his home.
We located a ledger which had all the people that he owed money to. Which is significant because now we corroborated that he did have debt.
During the process of the search, we were able to find 8 different phones in the house of Roman and his wife.
But we did not find an actual cell phone that was associated with the burner phone number that we were looking for.
However, one of the cell phones we discovered was a number that the burner phone had communication with over 160 times. We determined that cell phone belongs to Blanca, who is Roman's wife.
This is very significant in the point of this investigation because it's only relevant and probable that that phone actually belongs to Roman and that they were communicating together.
Having connected Roman to the burner phone that called Raphael the night he was killed, they haul him down to the station for questioning.
During that conversation, Roman was very standoffish, he was very short with his answers, and it was very clear that he was being deceitful.
Roman ended up stating that he did know of Raphael. He did know that Blanca had gotten a ride from him in the past.
We asked Roman about his alibi that night and where he was. He told us that he was at home the entire night and that his wife does not let him leave the house after 7, 8 o'clock at night. When confronting Roman about the burner phone number, Roman began to tell us that he does not know that number.
I don't remember the number. It doesn't ring a bell. Tell him that lying does not help. La mentira no ayuda a su situación.
Roman's wife Blanca has been in communication with this phone over 100 times. So I'm asking Roman, if it's not you calling your wife 100 times, who is? And he can't provide me with a good answer for that. Eventually, he has to just kind of concede that, yes, that's me. And that at the time of the homicide, that he had actually loaned the phone to someone else.
I think Roman is the killer. I think Roman's lying. We can prove that the vehicle like his is in the area. We can prove that this burner phone was in the area at the scene, communicating with his wife.
Yeah, I was angry when he tried to ask for dinner, but I didn't kill him. I wouldn't do anything to him even if I found him in bed with her.
Why is he lying?
¿Por qué no está mintiendo? ¿Por qué?
No estoy mintiendo yo.
I'm not lying.
Why did he kill Raphael?
¿Por qué lo mató Rafael?
No lo maté yo.
I didn't kill him.
We are convinced that Roman is actually the person that has lured Raphael to the scene of the crime, based on the evidence of murder in the first degree.
Roman is taken into custody, but there is still the question of Roman's accomplice, the second killer.
We know from the scene that there was 2 people involved and that one person could not have committed this crime alone. We were very worried because you have a person who had killed somebody running loose in the community who could potentially kill another. So it was important for us to try to track this person down to get him into custody so he didn't harm anyone else.
In the brutal murder of Rafael Hernandez, investigators have Roman Medrano in custody for first-degree murder. But they believe he had an accomplice, and this person is at large.
It was clear that Roman was probably involved and that he wasn't cooperating. We got a break when the lab results come in from the evidence that we sent off to be analyzed.
We find that one of the beer cans we recovered from the scene had Roman Medrano's DNA on it. So that gave us a physical tie to the scene with Roman Medrano. But also, there was a fingerprint pulled off that belonged to a man by the name of Adon Mora.
Armed with physical evidence tying Roman Medrano and Adon Mora to the crime scene, investigators confront Roman about his association with Adon.
He told us that he was there at the scene because Adon had called him because he was thirsty and brought him some beer. They hung out for a period of time, and then he left.
Which is just one of about 4 versions of the story that Roman gave to us during the course of this investigation.
He's now admitting that he's there, but it doesn't make sense that they were just down there drinking beer and didn't say anything because we know that Raphael was there at the time they were.
Having established that Roman and Adon conspired to murder Raphael, a first-degree murder warrant is issued for Adon.
It was very difficult to locate Adon. We know that he left the state. It took us just over 1 year to track down and locate Adon.
We were ultimately able to find Adon on social media and locate him in Detroit, Michigan. We contacted the U.S. Marshals, and within the day, they had Adon in custody, and he was en route back to Oklahoma.
When interviewing Adon, we asked him about him and Roman's relationship, and Adon was telling us that Roman was constantly asking him for money. He was always broke. Adon gives Roman $500, and Roman promises to give it back, but he doesn't. We talked to Adon about the night that Raphael was killed, and Adon began telling us that he wanted his $500 from Roman, and Roman told him, "I don't have it, but a friend is going to pay it. He said, meet us over here at the Caney River Bridge, and Roman makes several phone calls. Eventually, ultimately, Raphael does show up. Roman begins talking to Raphael about, hey, I need a jump, can you help me? So Adon then goes in front of the vehicle to lift the hood up and starts looking at the battery, and then hears 2 gunshots. Adon then sees that Roman had shot and killed Raphael. Adon says he was very confused about it all. He says that he had no part in it, he didn't help plan it, and that he was completely shocked. I don't believe that Adon was telling the truth. I believe that Adon wanted his money and that Roman had a plan and he carried out that plan with Roman. It does seem that Adon and Roman are trying to pin the homicide on each other. They're both pointing the fingers at one another.
When 2 or more offenders commit at least one murder, there can be advantages such as getting one to crack. But if they've established a consistent and believable alibi and loyal to each other, getting one to crack or betray the other or break ranks can be very difficult, and what you have is essentially a stalemate.
Roman lawyered up, and then part of his plea deal was to tell us what happened. Roman eventually implicated himself during this homicide and admitted that he was there. The motive of Roman for this case is jealousy and money. They both wanted money because they were both broke, and that Roman had an additional motive for Raphael hitting on his wife.
Detectives are now able to unravel the final 24 hours of Rafael Hernandez's life.
The plan was Roman and Adon agree to kill Raphael and then split the money that they take from him. On April 25th, Roman Medrano purchases the burner phone using a fake identity. At approximately 8:30 in the evening on April 30th, Roman and Adon drive to the area of the Caney River Bridge at Highway 169. At 9:15, they make contact with Raphael. Roman and Adon use the ruse that they are going to get Raphael to drive them somewhere because they're having car problems and they need help.
Raphael calls Ernesto at 9:22 p.m. and lets him know that he has to go help a friend before he takes him to Texas.
Raphael's phone begins making contact with the tower, putting him in the location of the homicide at approximately 9:30 p.m. At 9:48, Raphael makes a phone call back to the burner phone, which was his last call. We believe that Raphael was lured down below the bridge once he got to the area by Roman and Adon. And once Raphael's down there, I think that he probably starts to Roman pulls out the gun and shoots him. Raphael gets shot, and then Roman and Adon take the money from his pants pockets.
Adon and Roman then loaded Raphael's body into the trunk of the car.
They drive the car right up to the edge of the river, and then pushed it over the edge into the river.
There is something that you get in a sadistic way from being able to dupe someone, to lure someone there, and then get back at them for whatever your reason might be, whether that's jealousy or something else. And in my mind, that's a dark personality who's willing to do something like that.
Roman's cell phone was making communication with the tower at the scene of the homicide at 10:17. And then records indicate that he's back in Tulsa at 10:33 p.m. on the night of the homicide.
Without the cellular device and without the recent phone numbers, this case would not have been made.
In April 2017, Roman Medrano waives his right to a jury trial and enters a plea of no contest to murder in the first degree.
The judge ended up sentencing him to life with the possibility of parole.
Roman is also ordered to pay $7,000 of restitution to Raphael's family.
Adon Mora is charged with accessory to first-degree murder and is sentenced to 15 years in jail.
This is the most complex homicide I've been involved in to date. All the phone numbers, the nicknames, the Hispanic Latino community with the language barrier. All we wanted was information that we could use that was true and accurate to find out who did this and to solve it.
It was a lot of hard work. It was a lot of frustration. It was a lot of hours, away from my family and all of our families. But, the end justifies it.
Today, Rafael Hernandez is remembered by his family and community is a caring man, always ready to help a friend in need.
It was heartbreaking to learn that he was killed over money and a possible relationship, and that his family had to go through all that. It was very saddening because he was a breadwinner for the family.
You know, that big heart is ultimately what lured him out there and got him murdered.
They watched these two men force Mr. Stark into the Dodge Caravan and drive off with him into the night.
A married father of 7 children, abducted and murdered.
He was a successful real estate businessman and respected member of the Hasidic community.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
Mr. Stark owed $40 million to his business dealings.
He roped up the rest of his family members in, and it went horribly wrong.
If you can't get approved for a conventional bank loan, your next best choice probably shouldn't be the mob.
They'll send a couple of goons to your house and make you pay.
The truth will be revealed.
This guy's very nervous. You know, he knows something.
We think that he was full of schnizzle.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Williamsburg, New York. A vibrant neighborhood in Brooklyn, where modern style blends with old-world charm.
Williamsburg, in the last 15, 20 years, has become very gentrified. It's a melting pot of all different types of communities.
The community of Williamsburg is also heavily Hasidic. They're very traditional, very tight-knit community.
People that work in the stores are Hasidic. The bus drivers, the mechanics, it's sort of a all-inclusive neighborhood.
The area of Williamsburg itself is a pretty safe area. You have the occasional robberies, burglaries, but murders, very rarely. It's not the worst area in Brooklyn.
On a cold winter's night, the 90th Precinct gets an alarming call about a member of the Hasidic community.
The 911 call was made by a Hasidic woman. She had called in concern that her husband did not arrive home, which is unlike him. He always came home the time that he said.
The night of January 2nd into the early morning hours of January 3rd, the snow was coming down. It was a blizzard. So when he didn't come home at the time she expected him, she was very afraid for her husband's safety.
The missing man is 39-year-old Menachem Stark, a prominent member of Williamsburg's Hasidic community.
Mr. Stark was a married father of 7 children. He was a very successful realtor, many tenants. He was very beloved by his family and friends, and his life was really about his community and his family.
Police are dispatched to Menachem Stark's last known whereabouts, his office on Rutledge Street.
His brother Al was at the office where Menachem was supposed to be and explained to us that Menachem was not there. But Menachem's car was still at the location, and nothing there seemed to be out of place.
When detectives watched video surveillance from the cameras in his office building, they were able to see that something was wrong.
Shortly after 11:40 p.m., Menachem can be seen exiting his office and being jumped by 2 large men.
The video is grainy, it's dark, so it's tough to make out faces. We can't see faces on there at all.
Detectives still see Menachem Stark leaving his office, and a figure gets out of the Dodge Caravan that's sitting parked outside. That person approaches him, seems to engage Mr. Stark in some kind of a conversation, and immediately you see that figure start wrestling Mr. Stark to the ground. And then a second figure comes out of the Dodge Caravan, runs over to Mr. Stark, and starts helping the first figure get control of Mr. Stark. And Mr. Stark was fighting for his life in that moment.
So after about 4 minutes, the two individuals are successful in getting Mr. Stark into their vehicle, and then the van drives off.
For investigators seeing this video, right away they know that Mr. Stark has been kidnapped. I mean, there's no mistaking that.
Tasked with investigating the kidnapping of Menachem Stark are detectives Matt Collins and Chris Scarry of Brooklyn's 90th Precinct.
Even if the kidnapper's intention is to hold this person and get payment in some way, kidnapping is by definition violent, and so additional violence could be perpetrated in order to control your victim and obtain what you want. Plus, if it doesn't go according to plan, now you have a witness who may be able to identify yourself and your accomplices as the kidnappers.
This incident now ramps up our efforts. We must find Mr. Stark in a timely manner.
To find Menachem Stark, investigators will need to reconstruct the 24 hours leading up to the businessman's kidnapping.
Because the video was very grainy, we were unable to see any type of license plate from the vehicle that Mr. Stark was put in.
The area is an industrial zone. There's no witnesses in the area at that time.
We found some duct tape out in front of the location. Mr. Stark's vehicle was also left at the scene, so those two items we were able to take possession of and go further from there.
Race's wife, Bashi, to learn more about Menachem's activities before his kidnapping.
When we went to go speak with Mr. Stark's wife, she had 7 children in the apartment with her. She was extremely concerned.
Bashi Stark knew when to expect her husband home. Mr. Stark was a family man. He had a lot of responsibilities, but she always knew where he was going to be.
Vashi had spoken to Menachem at about 8:42 that evening and asked him what time he might be home. He had told her he had some business to tend to, and he was thinking somewhere about 11:30.
We asked, is this normal for him to go to office at 11:30 at night on a Thursday was? And she said, no, it was normal. He'd go there for a half hour and then he'll return home.
But that evening, after 11:30 had passed, Vashi became concerned and called Menachem's phone at about 11:40. And Menachem did not pick up his phone, which was unusual for him. She waited a short time longer, and she called Menachem's number again at 12 o'clock. The phone was picked up, but there was no answer, and hung up, which was highly unusual. This is what Vashi became very, very concerned about.
Investigators turn to Menachem Stark's cell phone records, hoping they'll be able to pinpoint his location.
They're able to get location information for Mr. Stark at certain times throughout the night that he was using his cell phone. And so they were able to actually see throughout the night when Mr. Stark was exactly where his wife thought he was, and that was at his office.
Mr. Stark's phone records reveal that after Vashi had made that phone call to Menachem's phone, about midnight, his phone was moving. And it moved from his office, headed southbound, leaving Brooklyn. And after about 12, the phone had been disabled at that time.
With Menachem's trail going cold shortly after midnight, detectives redoubled their efforts to track him down. Then, they receive an unexpected lead from another New York police department.
On January 3rd, out in Great Neck, Long Island, a gas station attendant comes into work and sees that there is smoke coming out of a dumpster. He gets closer to the dumpster and he smells something very, very bad, and he immediately calls 911. The fire department arrives, the police arrive, and they open up the dumpster, and they see the badly burned body of a man who's dressed in traditional Hasidic garb. The man who was found in the dumpster at that gas station is identified as being Menachem Stark.
This is the worst case scenario in kidnapping cases where the person kidnapped is killed.
With the body identified as Menachem Stark,
The body is dumped and set on fire, so it's very shocking and jarring. I think it speaks for a callous disregard for life. Most kidnappings are committed by acquaintances, so these killers likely don't have a strong personal connection with the victim.
Investigators work to establish a time frame for Menachem Stark's murder.
Mr. Stark had been kidnapped around 11:40 p.m. from Williamsburg. And from the gas station attendant out in Great Neck, Long Island, they knew that that dumpster was full of smoke early in the morning, probably sometime just after 7 a.m.
So now we have a window of about 11:40 at night when Mr. Stark was taken in a van, and then the next morning, January the 3rd, when there was smoke coming out of the dumpster.
So for investigators, it's now their job to figure out, well, who was driving the van that night and who did this to Mr. Stark?
Looking for answers, investigators turn to the autopsy results.
When the medical examiner examines Mr. Stark's body, he determines that the cause of death was compression asphyxiation, or in lay people's terms, someone put so much pressure on Mr. Stark's chest that he couldn't breathe and he suffocated.
What we had at that point was there were at least 2 people involved with this kidnapping/homicide case, but we still were not aware of the motivation behind why Menachem was killed.
In the abduction and murder of Hasidic businessman Menachem Stark, detectives from the 90th Precinct are searching for 2 suspects, seen on video surveillance pulling him into a van the night he disappeared.
We have to find out the motivation behind what was happening here. And at that very moment, we didn't know what that was and who might have done this to Mr. Stark.
For the traditional tight-knit community, Menachem Stark's brutal death is a devastating loss.
The funeral procession of Menachem Stark was very touching and impressive.
Mr. Stark was a very generous man in the community. He was very well known and well respected. So when he passed, he had a lot of, not just family, a lot of friends who were devastated by the news also.
The family obviously was very, shook into the core that somebody would do this to one of their family members. They were scared, and they certainly wanted us to do everything we could to get the people responsible for that.
Having determined that Menachem was likely killed by the 2 men seen on video grabbing him on the street, investigators dig into his real estate business, looking for potential suspects.
We had discovered a check that Menachem had made out $2,000 that had bounced.
Thomas Falcone is a contractor. He's the head contractor that Mr. Stark does business with. Mr. Stark would buy a building that needed work to be done, so he had to bring a contractor in to fix up the building. This was Mr. Falcone.
Detectives track down Thomas Falcone and bring him for an interview.
Mr. Falcone had been doing many projects for Mr. Stark and had a fairly good business relationship until recently.
There was times where Mr. Stark could not pay Mr. Falcone the money that was needed for Mr. Falcone to pay his employees. So that became heated, where the point where Mr. Falcone would have to go to Mr. Stark's office and demand to be paid.
Detectives continue to question Mr. Falcone about the tensions in their relationship, but he's not forthcoming.
I would say he was a little bit arrogant. He hid a lot of information from us during the investigation. So we were kind of getting more and more suspicious about what was going on with Mr. Falcone.
I asked him about his whereabouts when this incident took place, and Mr. Falcone indicated to me that he had been at a construction site on Long Island all day, and then about 6 o'clock he rode back to his residence, which was in Queens, and was home with his family at his house for the rest of the night. We were able to confirm that, in fact, that's what happened as far as his whereabouts at the time of the crime.
With no solid suspects emerging, detectives do a deep dive into Menachem Stark's business, looking for new leads.
Menachem was a real estate person in Brooklyn. We know that that's a very competitive, cutthroat type business. But as we got more into his financial background, we realized that he was and his company were facing shortage of cash and some bankruptcies.
He owes a substantial amount of money to many people. We find in the course of this investigation that Mr. Stark owed nearly $40 million in totality to his business dealings.
He had to borrow a lot of money from banks and from other people to cover debts.
One of the motivations of homicide is, in fact, financial motivations behind the killing. So finding out that Mr. Stark wasn't as financially sound as maybe people thought he was definitely a path to look down involving his death.
Then investigators discover Menachem Stark has a business partner named Israel Perlmutter. They speak with him down at the station, hoping he'll provide more information about their financial dealings.
Perlmutter is a big shot of the community. He's a person that Mr. Stark would go to a bank account at a certain time for a check to clear. He would ask Mr. Perlmutter who would put money into the bank account.
Mr. Perlmutter told us that he had some type of dispute with Mr. Stark about money. Some of the money might have been missing along the way, and that Menachem didn't give him a good enough answer to why this happened.
He's like, listen, if somebody took $300,000 out of your account, wouldn't you be upset? But he also tells us that they've both taken money out of the bank account to pay for, family things or to pay off certain debts.
As investigators continue questioning Mr. Perlmutter, his behavior begins to raise suspicion.
One of the things in my mind when I was speaking to him was that he was a bit elusive with me and a bit standoffish, which as an investigator start to ring some bells in your head. We weren't sure if this is somebody that we should be interested in, or is this somebody that is just nervous with the police. But during the course of the interview, we were able to verify his whereabouts at the time of the crime.
Mr. Perlmutter was home with his family on the night of Menachem's abduction and murder. With his alibi confirmed, detectives ask him about a key detail they've uncovered.
During the course of our investigation, we find that Mr. Stark had deposited $200,000 into a business account just days before his kidnapping and murder. When I spoke to Mr. Perlmutter about it, again, he became elusive with me as to where this money actually came from. We were hearing the nexus of this money potentially was the alleged Russian mob. It becomes concerning. Was this something that organized crime may have been involved with as far as killing Mr. Stark?
Mr. Perlmutter, he started to realize that Menachem Stark might have been killed for the loans that he was defaulting on, and he was part of those loans, and if this had something to do with why Menachem was killed, then he might be next.
If Menachem Stark wasn't paying the money back in a timely fashion, this could be a motivating factor of why this happened.
If you go to Citibank and you borrow $100,000 from them and you can't pay, they usually send you a nasty letter. When you borrow money from the street and you don't pay them back, they'll send a couple of goons to your house and break your legs or break your arm and make you pay.
The Russian mob has their own set of rules, so if they have to get paid back, they're going to make sure they get their money back. This could be what happened to Mr. Stark.
In the man was over $40 million in debt and may have owed money to the Russian mob.
As investigators, the alarms go off in our heads, especially when you start hearing of money coming from potentially a Russian mobster. Mr. Stark's business partner, Israel Perlmutter, I'm sure he was elusive with me because he knew that borrowing money from people in organized crime was a very bad business mistake. Mr. Perlmutter indicated to me that he was very frightened at this time and concerned about his well-being.
I think it goes without saying that if you can't get approved for a conventional bank loan, your next best choice probably shouldn't be the mob. Borrowing a couple $100,000 from the Russian mafia in New York City, in terms of repayment plans, there's obviously significant personal risk attached to defaulting on that loan.
To pay back their debt to the Russian mob, Mr. Perlmutter reveals he and Menachem turned to a loan shark named Abe Hoffman.
Mr. Hoffman is somebody that people turn to get out of some type of trouble, hence the term loan shark. Menachem had gone to Mr. Hoffman and borrowed $500,000 to cover the money that was allegedly borrowed from a Russian mob figure from Brooklyn. We spoke with Mr. Hoffman, and he had told us that he had known Menachem for many, many years, had done business with Menachem many times and had no issues dealing with him.
So Mr. Hoffman deposited $500,000 in Mr. Stark's account the day before Mr. Stark's death. So once we've learned that, Mr. Hoffman was a person of interest, but not a suspect. Because it doesn't make sense to kill somebody who's going to owe you $500,000.
We also ruled the Russian mobster out as a person responsible for killing Menachem Stark because we confirmed that he was out of the country at the time of the murder.
With another suspect eliminated, detectives find themselves back at square one.
There was connections to loan sharks. There were connections to the Russian mob. You're dealing with a lot of shady individuals. It can be difficult to determine who did what.
There was a lot of pressure to solve this case. The family was very involved and the press was all over the story.
We were following up on everything we could. We have no specific leads that are leading anywhere right now. So it was getting a little discouraging at this time.
But it's one of those things where you don't go home until you solve the case. If you didn't like the pressure, you wouldn't be in the Brooklyn squad.
Detectives were looking into was that this was premeditated. The people that kidnapped Mr. Stark, how could they know that he was at his office at a specific time? It wasn't just luck that they went out in a blizzard, hung out outside his office at 11:30 at night, and Mr. Stark walked out. So the theory was they had to have had a way to know where Mr. Stark was.
We started to put together that, maybe there was somebody who was giving information to the killers, or there was some tracking advice on Menachem's car. There was a trend that we saw in certain crimes through Brooklyn, because detectives talk to each other. It was sort of a cheap GPS device where people would take cell phones with location trackers on it and sticking them in people's cars or underneath people's cars, and they were able to follow victims or know where they are and be able to abduct them or shoot them.
Armed with this new information, investigators worked the theory that Menachem Stark's SUV was being tracked by his killers.
Crime scene detectives are brought in to, again, forensically go over Mr. Stark's car.
The only way to find out if there was a tracking device under the car was to look. So we examined the car, and there you go. There was a cell phone attached to the gas tank of Menachem Stark's car. It was the general consensus that whoever put the phone under Menachem Stark's car is going to be the guy, or the guy that could lead us to who killed him. Now we have the phone, and it blew the whole case wide open.
The discovery of this phone was important because law enforcement now can do what's called a forensic extraction, and they can get the data that's in the cell phone.
Finding the cell phone beneath Menachem Stark's car is a huge break for investigators. Devices like cell phones can be treasure troves of evidentiary information, names, numbers, other data that can help lead investigators to his killer.
As detectives await the analysis on the cell phone, they turn their attention to the van used to kidnap Menachem the night of his murder.
The auto crimes expert had narrowed down the make and model of this van. He had told the detectives they're looking for a Dodge Caravan, and he gave them a year.
We're able to look at this video, which was not very good, but you were able to make out the type of license plate.
We were able to establish that there was Pennsylvania plates on the van. It's tough to make out numbers, but with that, we were able to find that a silver minivan was owned by Philip Felix.
So investigators, they drive out to the address for Philip Felix, and they see the Dodge Caravan parked right outside of the address. They notice the unique things about the Dodge Caravan, and they think...
The good news was it had outstanding parking tickets on it, so we brought it back to the 9-0 precinct and impounded it for the tickets.
With the Dodge Caravan now in police custody, the crime scene unit processes the vehicle, searching for evidence of Mr. Stark's kidnapping and murder.
There was a check that was made out to Mr. Stark from a tenant that was found inside the van.
There are marks on the tilings and on the carpet that could be potential bloodstains. DNA testing and analysis was done, and what they find out is that Menachem Stark's blood was in Philip Felix's van. So they know beyond a shadow of a doubt now that Menachem Stark was kidnapped in this van. Investigators now have to figure out, well, who was driving the van that night and who kidnapped and killed Mr. Stark.
Detectives bring Philip Felix, the van's owner, down to the station for an interview.
When I spoke to Mr. Felix in regards to if he knew who Menachem Stark was, he indicated to me that he did business with Mr. Stark in the past with some construction project.
We asked Mr. Felix about the van, about who uses the van. He told us that the van was used by his son, Erskine. It was used by his nephew. They use it for work. They work as contractors in areas of Brooklyn.
Philip Felix, he was pretty forthcoming with us, whether he was a very good poker player or he had no idea what happened that night. He gave us all the information that we need. We had no reason to hold him, so he was released.
So we got direction which way we're going. We have the players involved now, the vehicle that was used, but we still don't know exactly why this occurred.
The case gets another boost when the phone records come back on the cell phone used to track Menachem's vehicle.
The subscriber info on this phone belonged to a Jeff Seeley.
Jeff Seeley is the owner of a construction company in Brooklyn. When investigators dig into the phone records, what they also learn is that Jeff Seeley registered this phone on the Sprint Family Locator Plan so that he could track it on his own account, and that Jeff Seeley or someone strapped this phone to the bottom of Menachem Stark's vehicle, enabling them to track anyone who's driving Mr. Stark's car.
There was phone numbers inside the phone also, and those phone numbers connected to 4 individuals: Irvine Henry, Kendall Felix, and Erskine Felix.
Detectives first turn their attention to the registered owner of the cell phone, Jeff Seeley. They bring him into the station for questioning.
We asked Jeff Seeley if he knew Menachem Stark, and he says that Menachem Stark was a gentleman who they would do construction work for.
Sometimes Jeff Seeley tells law enforcement that he set up this phone for his friend Erskine Felix in order to track a girl, because Erskine Felix had told him, listen, I'm dating a woman that I don't trust. I need you to help me out. You have Sprint, and Sprint has that Sprint Family Locator program. So can you set this phone up, and I'm going to use it to track this girl? So Jeff Seeley told investigators, I set this up for him, I gave him the phone, and that's all I know about it.
When investigators look into Jeff Seeley's alibi, he was at home during the window of time Menachem was killed. Detectives then ask Jeff if he or anyone he knows has any problems with Menachem Stark.
Then Jeff Seeley tells us that Erskine Felix did work for Menachem Stark and that Menachem Stark owes him about $20,000. We're thinking, here we go, we have motive.
And not only did Erskine Felix work on his job sites, he actually did work in Mr. Stark's home. He was someone who was in Mr. Stark's life and had access to him.
We all believed that the person that put the phone under Menachem Stark's car would be responsible for the murder, and we know that the van used to abduct Menachem Stark was related to Erskine Felix, and now we have this little bit of information that Menachem Stark owed him $20,000. That's a very good motive to kill somebody.
In the abduction homicide of New York real estate developer Menachem Stark, detectives are closing in on construction contractor Erskine Felix after discovering Menachem owed him $20,000 for a past job.
Erskine Felix is one of the workers on Menachem Stark's job sites, his various properties. Erskine Felix had the ability to get that tracking device on his car.
Detectives haul Erskine Felix down to the station for questioning.
Erskine is a very large man, very buff, about 6'4". Looks like somebody in the video we saw involved in the kidnapping of Mr. Stark.
Erskine Felix, he came across as a very confident alpha type. He basically said that he loved Menachem Stark and portrayed his relationship with Menachem Stark sort of as like the family member.
When detectives ask Erskine Felix about his financial dealings with Mr. Stark, they get a surprising response.
Erskine Felix said, sometimes he owes me money, but he always pays me, and kind of brushed it off.
Then, detectives confront Erskine about his phone number being in the cell phone found strapped to the bottom of Mr. Stark's car.
tells investigators that Mr. Stark was scared of, so he says, I came up with this idea where I was going to track him using this tracking device. And then Erskine tells investigators that he didn't even tell Mr. Stark that he was doing this.
Police aren't buying Erskine Felix's story.
We think that he was full of schnizzle. If he would have stuck with the story that he asked Jeff Haley for a phone to track his girlfriend, it would be a little bit more credible.
We asked him his whereabouts on the night of January 2nd, and he was steadfast saying that he had been with his girlfriend the whole night. He was very elusive and seemed to be uninterested with this investigation. Our opinion was that Erskine was not being truthful with anything regarding this case.
But without physical evidence or a witness tying Erskine to the crime, detectives are forced to let him go.
At this point, we were all zeroed in on Erskine Felix as being the main character, and we also were looking at his other family members.
From the phone that was strapped to the bottom of Mr. Stark's car, there's definitely a picture being painted that Erskine Felix, Kendall Felix, and Irvine Henry are involved. They're all talking at the night of the kidnapping into the early morning hours when the body is dumped.
Hoping for a confession, detectives bring the three other men down to the station for separate interviews.
Investigators interview Kendall Felix, and Irvine Henry as close in time as could be possible. This is a very tight-knit group of family members. So the last thing that investigators want is to interview one person, have him go home, and tell everybody else, this is what I said. Say the same thing.
The behavior of Kendall Felix, Erskine Felix's younger cousin, catches the investigators' attention.
Like everybody in the Felix family, Kendall really looked up to Erskine Felix.
He came across as compassionate. He seemed to be a little bit remorseful on what happened to Menachem Stark.
This guy's very nervous. You know, he knows something. So we started asking him about his background. He said his father is a reverend. So Detective Collins really hit on with your father is a reverend. You know, it's time to come forward with the truth. The right thing to do is not lie.
When detectives press Kendall Felix about his whereabouts on the night of the crime, they get an unexpected break.
He confessed to what had taken place that night with Mrs. Stark. He explains this was all Erskine's plan, and he actually dragged his cousins and brother into it.
With Kendall's confession, detectives are able to piece together Menachem Stark's final 24 hours.
Kendall Felix tells about a way to get money that was owed to him from Mr. Stark, and he told Kendall to commit this kidnapping with him.
Erskine told Kendall, we're going to go grab Menachem Stark, we're going to make him write some checks, and Kendall's like, this is crazy, I don't want to do that. But Erskine said, no, you're doing it. Erskine was the one that was calling the shots.
It was more of a robbery extortion plan than it was a murder.
January 2nd, Erskine and Kendall meet up, and Kendall drives the light-colored minivan owned by Philip Felix, and they drive over to Menachem Stark's office and park their vehicle.
About 6 p.m., Kendall exits the vehicle, cases location, walks up and down the block, and gets back in the van after that.
At 11:40, Menachem Stark's walking out of his office, and Erskine Felix goes up to Menachem Stark, and he puts him in like a bear hug. And Menachem Stark just starts violently fighting.
The fight that ensued was nearly 5 minutes of Mr. Stark just fighting for his life.
At 11:46, Kendall Felix came up, and they both get Menachem Stark and throw him in the back of the van.
Erskine and Kendall Felix were trying to subdue Mr. Stark. Erskine climbs on him and puts his full weight on top of Mr. Stark and sits on his chest.
And after a time of doing that, Mr. Stark stopped fighting, no longer making noise, and they realized something went terribly wrong. They killed him.
A few minutes later, Erskine Felix texts his cousin, Irvine Henry, for added assistance with the crime.
I think at that point they were so panicked they didn't know what to do, because now essentially have a dead body in your van, and you need to get rid of the body. So at 12 o'clock, when Beshi, Mr. Stark's wife, tried to locate him and call him, it was Erskine who picked up the phone and then turned off the phone.
At 12:26, Kendall and Erskine picked up Erskine's brother Kendall and his cousin Irvine Henry.
And Erskine tells Kendall and Kendall to dispose of the body. They make it out to Great Neck, Long Island at 3:30 in the morning, and then they throw the body of Menachem Stark into the dumpster fire.
The police recover the body on January 3rd. The plan was to kidnap Mr. Stark and hold him for ransom, and it went horribly wrong. Family members in.
Money was the intent behind kidnapping in this case, and it just reminds us that any violent crime has the potential to lead to murder, especially when you are committing an offense with a co-offending group. So it's very sad that it had gone this way and could have been avoided. It's really tragic.
In September 2019, Erskine Felix stands trial for the kidnapping and murder of Menachem Stark. A jury found Erskine guilty, and he's sentenced to 24 years to life in prison.
It was pretty clear that this was planned and premeditated by Erskine Felix, and he really destroyed his own family too.
Erskine's accomplice, Kendall Felix, who confessed, is sentenced to 15 years. Erskine's brother, Kendall Felix, and cousin Irvine Henry also plead guilty and are sentenced to 7 years in prison.
When you combine the video surveillance with the phone records and you look at the timeline, and you look at who is calling who at what different times, you can actually start to paint a picture of who was together, when they were together, and what different roles they played.
This case had many twists and turns, and then it led to a few guys that were owed $20,000, and it's just so senseless.
For Menachem Stark's family and community, his loss continues to be deeply felt.
You want to get some kind of vindication for them, so they have a little bit of a peace of mind that, all right, justice was served.
They do get closure, but they're still going to be missing their father, their brother, their husband. And I know in the Hasidic community there's a saying that the blood won't rest until the person that was responsible for killing the person is prosecuted for his crimes.
It's something you're never going to be able to unsee.
This was a brutal, vicious, and evil murder.
We lost this amazing woman who loved being a mother more than anything else in the world.
Multiple suspects, each with their own shocking secrets.
Who's she talking to? What's the connection? Could he possibly be the killer?
Perhaps she had threatened to expose the relationship to his wife. He wanted things his way and only his way.
She does have a .32 caliber handgun.
And they said, I just killed Missy.
This was an odd twist to this investigation.
The truth will be revealed.
We need to get the timeline as quickly as possible so that we can catch who the killer is.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Murfreesboro, Tennessee, a small city with plenty of southern charm, just 34 miles southeast of Nashville, offering a quiet escape from the hustle and bustle of Music City.
Murfreesboro is often considered a bedroom community of Nashville. The people here are very well educated. There's a lot of good jobs here.
In its day, it was a small town. Most people who lived there had been born and raised there. Everybody knew everybody.
Population has increased well over 100,000 now, but I would consider it a safe town.
We do have our share of property crime, but we do not have a real problem with homicide, although one homicide is one too many.
But on a quiet Sunday afternoon, a 911 call comes into the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office that shakes this sleepy town wide awake.
911?
Yes, sir?
I think my daughter's been murdered. There's blood on the back of her head. She's laying on the bed face down.
She's not breathing?
No.
Okay. I'll get somebody to you, okay?
On December 16th at 4:20 p.m., Doug Atkin reported that his daughter had been killed. This was the worst situation that I can imagine a parent discovering.
First responders arrive at the victim's home 4 minutes later at 4:24 p.m.
Doug and Linda tell the deputy that they have discovered their daughter's body in the bedroom of the house. She is lying face down on the bed. Her hands are there is blood added near her head and also on the bed itself. This was a brutal, vicious, and evil murder.
The victim is a devoted 36-year-old single mom named Melissa Atkin, better known as Missy.
Everyone that loves her and cares about her calls her Missy. There's not a person in the world that would hate this girl. She's got a very beautiful spirit.
As a young single mother, she could have played the victim card, but that was not in her DNA. Being a good parent was her greatest pride in her life and certainly her biggest responsibility.
Missy was a very devoted single mother. She loved her son, Lucas. Everything that she did was centered around Lucas.
Heading up the investigation into the brutal murder of Missy Atkin are detectives Ralph Marisick and Troy Hooker of the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office.
As soon as we arrived at the scene, and we did a walkthrough back to the bedroom to see where Missy was.
It was almost like somebody was in the process of cleaning, doing a little housework.
There was no bedding on the bed. It had been stripped off. Articles of clothing throughout the floor. The blinds in her bedroom were completely up, which was kind of odd for her to be naked and the blinds completely up. Some things that just kind of raised some red flags.
Her hands are tied behind her back. It's not a very good scene at this point. There's a million possibilities, a million different scenarios that we're trying to process now.
And then it hit me. Who it was. I knew her. My wife and her were very close friends. It was hard. With her body nude and zip-tied, face down on the bed, our first thought is that we've got some type of sex assault and murder that followed.
When we see these findings, as well as a body that's been unclothed, whether perimortem or postmortem, this is deemed a sexual homicide, even if a conventional sexual assault or rape has not occurred.
To solve Missy Atkin's murder, investigators will need to reconstruct the final 24 hours of her life. They begin by processing the crime scene.
Looking at Miss Atkin, you could tell that she had been shot in the back of the head more than once. That was apparent.
There's blood spatter on her back, consistent with her being bound and shot in that position.
The investigators had to consider, how did this particular crime happen? It appears that she was cleaning up her bedroom, and Missy may have been very much surprised by someone entering the home, and this strongly indicates that someone was able to overpower the head.
When we moved her body, the bullet just kind of dropped out onto the mattress. This bullet was pristine, like it had just been taken off from the case.
Looking at it, I could tell that it was probably a .32 caliber.
The bullet was sent to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation Crime Laboratory for verification.
This happened within a ballpark of a 12-hour window. There's no decomposition. The rigor on her body is fixed, so we know we're past a 4-hour window. So we're probably 4 to 12 hours. Definitely she had not been there very long, half of that.
With the bedroom processed, detectives work their way through the remainder of the house, looking for clues that will help them build a narrative of Missy's murder.
The house was locked, the windows were all locked. Nothing was damaged, but the sliding door had been forced open.
It was wide open, and the curtains were actually blowing to the outside. Based on those observations, whoever came to the house did not have a key. It had rained that Saturday night and early Sunday morning, and the outside of the home on Grassland Drive was wet and muddy. There were muddy footprints in the kitchen area. Those footprints were then later examined to try to help establish who had been inside the home.
As far as the property, the electronics are all there. There's jewelry. Nothing looked like it had been burglarized or any type of theft.
From examining the crime scene, the detectives did not believe that this was a robbery that had gone wrong.
They begin to consider alternative theories of the crime.
The method of the murder is often used to tell you about the relationship between the murder victim and the killer. The police considered three distinct possibilities. One, that it was a rape and a murder. The second possibility was that it wasn't a rape, but it was staged to appear to be a rape. Or the third possibility, she was left there in that position simply to humiliate her.
As police finish processing the crime scene, one of Missy's neighbors comes forward with information.
One of the neighbors established that he had seen Missy about 11:45-ish on the evening of the 15th, going into the 16th.
While he was driving, he saw through Melissa's window Melissa inside, and she appeared to be cleaning her house. That gave us a time of 11:45 that we knew she was still alive.
Detectives are now able to determine that Missy was killed sometime between 11:45 p.m. on December 15th and 4:20 p.m. on December 16th, when her body was found. They turn to Missy's parents, Linda and Doug Atkin, hoping they can shed light on who might have wanted to harm Missy.
You can tell they're upset, but they know they've got to get us information about the time.
December 14th, Linda and Doug saw Missy at the karate studio, where she and Lucas trained.
Also present was Lucas's biological father, Scott Reynolds.
Scott had picked up Luke. There was some argument over who was going to have Luke that weekend. He was planning a party for him, and it was Scott's weekend.
The relationship between Scott and Missy could only be described as one that was rocky.
After handing Lucas off to his father, Scott Reynolds, Missy's parents wanted to keep their daughter company that Saturday.
They spent the day of Saturday, December 15th, mostly with Missy. And sometime between 7:30 and 8, Melissa said that she had to go to Walmart. She asked her mother to call her Sunday morning to give her a wake-up call.
Missy was supposed to go see her father at the church because he was getting a special recognition that day.
So the next morning, Missy's parents make the phone call around 7:30. Missy doesn't answer. So her parents go ahead and go to church without her.
Missy being late to things from time to time, they probably just assumed she was going to show up at some point.
Later that afternoon, at approximately 4 o'clock, they go check on her.
I can imagine him walking in the hallway. You're out for your daughter. And then walking into her bedroom and seeing her, the same way we found her. Except that's his daughter. It's something you're never going to be able to unsee.
During the interview, the Atkins were asked if they knew of anyone who might possibly want to harm their daughter.
Doug and Linda are very forthcoming about Missy's very volatile relationship with Scott, her ex and father, Lucas. You talk about Missy and her personality and her friends. This is a woman who is loved by everybody except Scott. So Scott is the most viable candidate for having killed Missy.
In the fatal shooting of 36-year-old single mom Missy Atkin, investigators have her ex-boyfriend, Scott Reynolds, who is also the father of her only child, in their sights.
Missy's mom called me the evening that they found her, and she said Missy's dead. And the first words out of my mouth were, he did it, he finally did it, he took her from us.
Scott Reynolds is a construction worker. He had met Melissa 10 years previous. They had a relationship for several years. People who knew Scott would say that Scott could charm you and was a person who could get angry with you. Scott was very controlling of Missy, very manipulative.
He wanted things his way and only his way, and if she were to push back too much, that it would kind of blow up between them.
Missy kicks him out, but it's a complex relationship in the fact that they also have a son together.
With a child together, Scott and Missy are still very present in one another's lives, and their relationship worsens.
The main source of the tension between Scott and Missy was custody issue and visitation. Scott felt he was entitled to have Lucas at exact equal time as Missy. Missy felt during the week that Lucas needed to stay home near school and near other activities.
Scott has an obsessed view of Lucas. This is his son. He loves him, but he's obsessed to the point that he doesn't want anyone else to have him.
At points as they were discussing their co-parenting arrangement, Scott would make threatening remarks to her in hopes that she would back down.
The week of Missy's murder, the fights got even uglier.
Missy was planning a birthday party for Lucas, but that weekend was supposed to be Scott's weekend. Scott objected, and he was not going to allow Missy to have Lucas. So on that Friday at the karate studio, he was there to pick up Lucas and take him for the weekend.
Less than 2 days later, Missy is found brutally murdered.
Scott Reynolds was a person who needed to be investigated because he had expressed his anger toward Missy. He was never physically abusive. He did not have a criminal record, but he expressed that he hated her, and he was very upset about the custody arrangement and the visitation.
With Missy's ex, Scott Reynolds, in their crosshairs, detectives bring him in for questioning.
Scott's a big man. I mean, this guy is a powerful, strong man, and appeared to be somewhat upset and very cooperative.
My heart goes out to her family because I could not imagine walking in and finding my child.
To find your little boy?
Any parent finding their child, I don't know. I can imagine.
Of course, he denied having anything to do with Miss Atkins' death.
If you had to think, is there anyone that would want her dead?
Anyone just because I couldn't imagine. I mean, you know her. She's an easy person to get along with.
Scott relayed that they had some custody issues with Luke. I think Scott glossed over how serious it was.
You know, I'm in this for my child. You know, and her and I, we're done. There's no sex there. There's no feeling there. There's no nothing there between her and I. You know, only thing was between her and I was our son. Other than that, what she does on her time, I have no idea. But we used to get along so well, you know, and then all of a sudden she just really put her foot down. So this is what I'm doing, whether you like it or not. I'm the mother, the law is on my side. This is how I get.
Of course, we went into his alibi of what he was doing that weekend.
Scott told the police he was in Lewisburg, Tennessee with his new girlfriend, Eve Barger, Lucas, and his stepson, Tanner.
Lewisburg is 45 minutes to an hour from Missy's house. Eve's got a farm up there.
That night they eat, watch a little television, and at approximately 11 o'clock, Eve goes to bed. Scott and Tanner continue and watch the movie. The movie goes off sometime between 1 and 1:30, and they eventually go to sleep.
Scott wakes up around 4 a.m., wakes his son Tanner up, had to go hunting that morning.
At approximately 5 a.m., Scott returns to Eve Barger's house and gets in the bed with Eve and Lucas. Scott and Eve get up at approximately 9 o'clock. They watch football during that day. At approximately 7:30 p.m., Scott, Tanner, and Lucas leave Lewisburg and head back home.
Police ask to search Scott's house. They're looking for a .32 caliber gun, believed to be the murder weapon.
When police search the home, they don't find the murder weapon, and this isn't surprising. Very seldom would a killer be careless enough to bring that home or keep it in a place where it could be easily found.
When we search Scott's house, we find a pair of jeans that look like they've got blood on them and some black zip ties. We've got to send those jeans and the zip ties off to see if we have a match. We're thinking, wow, maybe we've got something that we can link, and it would definitely point us in the right direction.
With the evidence mounting against him, detectives turn to Scott's new girlfriend, Eve Barger, to see if she'll back up his alibi.
She had met Scott Reynolds on eHarmony, and from that a relationship developed. She had been dating Scott for 3 to 4 months.
Eve tells investigators she's never met Missy, but she admits Scott has described their relationship as volatile.
told the police about how much he hated Missy, how he couldn't stand her, and he was very upset about the custody arrangement. She saw the anger in Scott and that there was a real breakup in the relationship between Scott and Missy.
Since the murder weapon wasn't at the crime scene or at Scott's house, detectives ask Eve if she owns any guns.
One of the things she does mention was that she does have a .32 caliber handgun, which of course is red flags for us because that's the same caliber that was used to kill Missy Atkin.
She had gotten the pistol during the time when she was divorcing her husband, and she had kept the pistol with other firearm and ammunition. Both Eve and Scott had access to a .32 caliber gun and the .32 caliber ammunition on the night that Melissa Atkin was murdered.
But when detectives grill Eve about Scott's alibi that Saturday night and Sunday morning, her story matches his perfectly.
Eve was able to corroborate Scott's alibi.
To the deer stand and go hunting. He'd come back, got into bed with her, and then they got up later in the morning and continued their Sunday.
It's like, wow, he's locked in all Saturday night with multiple witnesses that put him in Lewisburg till the wee hours of the morning.
Investigators have to consider the possibility that Scott could have snuck out of the house while everyone was sleeping and killed Missy.
If we'd have found Missy's blood on those jeans, that would have been a huge thing. But it turns out the blood on the jeans was Tanner's.
And he had a nosebleed, so that closes that avenue.
And the muddy footprints inside of the kitchen, nothing conclusive could be determined as far as who made them or when they were made.
They did a comparison with the zip ties. There were a disproportionate amount of teeth. They weren't the same length, different manufacturer. They were not identical. Essentially, it was a dead end.
Next, detectives triangulate the location of Scott's cell phone that night to see if it will place him near Missy's house.
Scott insisted that his cell phone was in Lewisburg the night of the murder. And the examination revealed that there were no pings near Missy's home that night.
Checking the cell towers, his phone at least had remained in the Lewisburg area.
He's in Lewisburg with Eve around that time, which takes him out of the suspect pool.
With Missy's ex, Scott Reynolds, eliminated as a suspect, detectives circle back to Missy's shopping trip to Walmart in the hours leading up to her death.
So we pulled the Walmart video, which ended up being pretty significant as far as narrowing down the timeline.
The Walmart video showed Missy arriving at the Walmart parking lot at 8:52 p.m. on December the 15th, 2007, approximately 9:30 p.m. While Missy is shopping at Walmart, a man approaches her and begins talking to her for approximately an hour. The man leaves and then comes back at approximately 10:40 p.m. The unknown man and Missy talked again for a few minutes. He then leaves the store at 10:47. Missy left the Walmart store at approximately 11:30 p.m. And this coincided with the neighbor reporting that he saw Missy through her window at 11:45 p.m. in her home.
Whoever she's talking to in Walmart, we know this is someone she's comfortable with. It's someone we definitely have to interview. Other than the neighbor who saw her through the window, this is the last person that talked to her in person. This is the last person that actually saw her physically that we know of other than the killer.
The police now focus their attention on what they can determine about the unknown man and his involvement with Missy at Walmart.
Of course, then you want to look into who's she talking to, what's the connection, and...
Detectives are zeroing in on a potential new suspect in the murder of 36-year-old Missy Atkin, a mystery man caught on security footage, speaking with her at length just hours before her murder.
Looking at Missy's phone records, the police discovered that Missy receives a phone call during the time that she is talking to the unknown man at Walmart. The phone call is from her brother, Kenneth. When the police interview Kenneth, he says that there was something unusual about the phone call. A man answered the phone, even though it was Melissa's phone number.
Some random guy's answering her phone. And he makes a comment, he's like, well, let me see if I can wake her up. So again, that's throwing up a lot of red flags for Ken, because now he's wondering what's going on. Who is this guy? Why are you answering my sister's phone?
Eventually, the caller reveals himself to be a mutual friend of both Ken and Missy.
So it turns out the person who answered Missy's phone was Randy Jameson. Randy thought it would be a good joke on Ken because at the time, Ken was dating Randy's sister. But also, Randy's one of the last people that sees Missy alive that night. So he's definitely going to be somebody that we need to talk to.
Through Missy's phone records, detectives confirm frequent and lengthy calls with Randy Jameson over the course of several months.
We understand, there's a good friendship there. Of course, he's married, but Randy was a very good friend of the family.
When trying to establish who might have committed a violent crime, you look at the people who have close relationships.
Randy Jameson was married and straying emotionally with Missy. He cared for her deeply, and there might have been an issue surrounding his wife finding out. Perhaps Missy threatened to expose their relationship to his wife, and that's what he acted on.
What was the reason for an hour-long conversation? Although the police were aware that he did leave before she did, they did not know where he went after that, whether he followed her home possibly, or whether he had any other involvement with Melissa that night.
With suspicion swirling around Randy Jameson, detectives bring him down to the station for questioning.
He does say that he is indeed the person who was with Missy at Walmart. As he was leaving the store, he received a phone call from his wife. He then went back shopping and once again ran into Missy, and then left again approximately 10:47 p.m.
He indicated that he did have kind of a crush, I guess, an interest in Missy had he not been married.
Detectives need to establish whether Randy Jameson had the opportunity to kill Missy.
When he left Walmart at 10:47, he went home at about 11:30 p.m. And when he arrived, his wife was home. He and his wife watched a little television and then went to sleep.
Eliminated as a suspect, the investigation into the murder of Missy Atkin hits a wall. But then, a surprising new witness comes forward.
Melissa's custody lawyer comes forward and provides the audio tapes of the Scott Reynolds phone calls to Missy. This was an odd twist to this investigation. As custody began to become a real issue in the case, Missy decided that she needed to have those phone calls recorded to protect her.
Please, I can't go without seeing my son. I'm not going to cut off until I get an answer.
The phone calls are important not only for the words spoken by Scott Reynolds, but also the tone expressed anger, the tone expressed disgust, the tone expressed a man who was desperate to get his own way.
You can either pick up your phone or I can come and find you. I don't care, but you're not going to keep me from going and watching them and crying. You're going to talk to me. Either pick up the phone or I'm going to come and find you.
These are the phone calls from a person who may want to harm, to injure, or possibly even kill Melissa Atkin.
You done lost your mind. Pick up the phone and talk to me for 2 minutes. You know how I get when you start doing this crap to me.
Some of them were pretty harsh to listen to Scott and his own words being threatening to Missy.
Either pick up the phone or I'm going to come and find you. You're going to talk to me, but I'm coming.
Although these audio recordings were strong evidence of motive, we needed further evidence to tie Scott Reynolds to the murder of Melissa Atkin. We needed corroboration.
Looking for answers, investigators turn to the medical examiner's autopsy report.
The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation determined that there was no evidence of a sexual assault. The way that her body was situated indicated that it was either for humiliation or to stage it so that it appeared to be a rape.
Whoever had come in to Missy's home that evening chose to leave her in a position of undress to lead the detectives in the wrong direction. The suggestion of a sexual motivation would lead them to other persons not connected to Scott Reynolds, our suspect.
When we rolled her over, we were able to recover a round there at the scene that was pristine. In addition, there were 3 other rounds in her skull that they pulled out at autopsy.
Through the autopsy report, detectives also learned Missy was shot 4 times at point-blank range.
The projectile we recovered during the autopsy is called a cantilure. It has a ridge around the base of the bullet, which helps see the bullet in the casing. It's unusual because they had ceased doing that in manufacture several decades ago, which indicated that the bullet was antiquated and not in common use at all.
It's confirmed the bullets were manufactured in the 1960s, and they're made for a...
This was an important piece of information because Scott's girlfriend, Eve, mentioned to the investigators that she did own a .32 caliber pistol.
This is not a .22 revolver or a 9mm that could be in any ganger's owner's hand. This is a relatively individuating weapon that naturally decreases the pool of potential owners and users of that weapon.
With this new information, detectives obtain a search warrant for Eve Barger's home and car.
She had a rifle, a shotgun, and in a small gun bag, there was a pistol missing, which happened to be a .32 caliber pistol.
She's like, wait a minute, there's a gun missing out of that bag.
She acted surprised. She did not know that it was missing.
We're also able to locate in her car, in the center console, 32 caliber bullets.
Scott had access to Eve's house. Eve had access to a .32, the right type, right manufacturer.
Detectives also search Eve's property.
On Sunday, before Scott left, they burned all their trash. I had one of our evidence guys sift the trash barrel. And if you looked in the bottom of this trash barrel, there was nothing but soot. But as he sifted through, we were able to find rivets and a label off a pair of Wrangler jeans. Scott was wearing a pair of Wranglers when he went to Eve's place that Saturday.
We've got the missing weapon at Scott Reynolds' girlfriend's house that matches the ammunition found at the crime scene. We have similar bullets in her car. We've got a pair of burnt Wrangler jeans, which is Scott Reynolds' preferred pair. It is a mountain of circumstantial evidence that just keeps piling up.
The 1960s-era bullets found in Eve's car are tested against the bullets used to kill Missy.
They matched the caliber of bullets that were found inside the body of Missy Atkins.
Definitely based on the evidence, the bullets, the ammunition, the missing gun. Eve was definitely a person of interest. And that's also going to set off alarm bells, and we're going to be back focusing on Scott again.
The task for the investigators is complicated in that both Scott and Eve serve as each other's alibi, and that alibi is corroborated by Tanner.
Eve has gone from being a witness to a suspect in the murder of Missy Atkins.
The motivation is possibly jealousy, or trying to help out Scott for some reason, or trying to endear herself to Scott.
Investigators bring Eve Barger in for another round of questioning. They confront her with the mounting evidence against her.
Eve began to tell the police more and more about the relationship she observed between Scott and Missy.
I had a picture sitting there of Missy, and she looked at the picture. She looked at me, she started crying, and Eve said, I've got to tell you something.
When Scott returned from the deer stand at 5 a.m. that morning, he couldn't rest properly.
Scott crawled into the bed. He was sobbing.
Didn't console Scott, and they got up later in the morning and continued their Sunday as if nothing had happened.
Of course, after she hears the news that Missy's really dead, she knows, holy crap, Missy's dead, and he just confessed to me.
One theory as to why Scott Reynolds would spontaneously confess after having gone to so much trouble to cover his tracks is that this presentation that he puts on for Eve, he knows will work, luring her in as someone who will lie for him, as someone who will be what we call an accessory after the fact. It's all the power of control.
Eve tells detectives her first impulse was to protect Scott, until she realizes he took her car and her gun and might be framing her.
So one of the things Scott asked Eve to do once he's returned back to her house in Lewisburg is to clean up her car. Unknowingly to her, he had used it that night to go kill Missy.
The statement from Eve concerning the mud in the car was significant because of the mud found inside the home of Missy Atkins. The investigators had to determine whether or not her story now was truthful.
To get that final nail in the coffin, so to speak, we need to get it from Scott, him explaining exactly what he did.
To get to the truth, they need to confront Scott with Eve's story. Armed with a warrant for his arrest, they go to haul him in.
But no one seemed to know where Scott was located.
We know he's capable of murder. One of the concerns was, is he going to try to just snatch Lucas and run?
In the brutal homicide of Missy Atkins, police are hunting for their lead suspect, her ex-boyfriend Scott Reynolds, who is on the lam.
He's trying to get away. He's trying to get out of Murfreesboro and Rutherford County.
To reach Scott, detectives enlist the help of his girlfriend Eve Barger, who knows police have as good a case against her as they do against him.
The police ask Eve to place a call to Scott Reynolds in the presence of the police officers and have that call recorded, and she agreed.
So if we can get him talking about it, and not only is it going to help us with evidence against Scott, but this is conversation that's going to help exonerate Eve.
leave your name, number, and a short message, I will return your call as soon as possible.
Hey, it's me.
When Eve called Scott, there was no answer.
I was just calling to see what you've been doing. I'm getting really scared, and I just needed to talk to you.
Shortly thereafter, Scott called her back on a private line.
Hello?
Where are you at?
Can't tell you. I need to talk to you on another phone line.
Well, I don't have
because your phone may be tapped.
Scott was very concerned whether or not he could trust Eve Barger.
I want to know that I can trust you.
And he was very closed-mouthed about any details regarding the murder of Melissa Atkins. But Eve tells Scott, you need to get this off of your chest. It will be such a relief of a burden.
I don't know what to do.
Well, why don't you just come in?
If I tear myself in, I'm going to jail. I'll never see him again.
She says, I know you love Lucas, but children visit their parents in prison all the time. Scott then says, not for killing their mother.
You know, Eve's portraying to Scott, and she's worried that she could go to jail herself.
I'm really scared. If you did use my gun, Dad could come back on board.
She ain't getting in trouble. You tell the truth. You tell the truth. You're nothing to worry about. You're secret the whole time. You don't have anything to worry about.
Why didn't you tell me? I couldn't even change your mind.
So Scott reassures her that she has nothing to do with this. So that it helps us verify Eve's story. It takes her out of that suspect pool. But it also reinforces the fact that Scott was the one that committed this act.
Several days go by, but Scott still won't turn himself in.
And then Scott had a custody hearing coming up on December 26th. One of Scott's ultimate goals was to get custody of his son. So we were thinking that Scott was going to show up for this hearing. So we're going to be ready.
On December 26th, 2007, Scott Reynolds arrives at the courthouse in Rutherford County for his son Lucas's custody hearing.
Detective Ralph Mersick and Detective Troy Hooker arrest him for the murder of Melissa Atkins.
He went peacefully, not a bit of trouble.
Investigators are now able to piece together Missy Atkins' final 24 hours.
December the 15th, 2007, Scott Reynolds had the opportunity to gain access to the .32 caliber Llama pistol kept in Eve's bedroom.
Tanner went to bed at 1 o'clock. Everyone's asleep. Scott decides he's going to take Eve's car to Missy's.
Scott Reynolds entered the home of Melissa Atkins. Missy was surprised by Scott Reynolds after throwing Missy to the bed and tying her hands securely behind her back. Scott Reynolds
If you really wanna go, baby, then you gotta take me the mess. I tried to soak in all the years and take it all in, but I come up for a breath and cry. I gave my drama, gave my simple, gave my friends a helping hand. I bet you know that they are dead. I wish I could tell you this. is not a town. The more we talk, the talk is not a time. I did not come this far for any stronger. All of a sudden there was nothing left. Well, last night a doctor thought you were lying. I never meant to keep you alive. There might be stuff we said that sound dumb to you, but to get a red wine and take it with a lid.